during this meeting. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. Lastly, in order to avoid disruption, members of the public and the media are reminded that during committee meetings to please enter and exit chambers only through the upper doors at each side of the gallery, unless physically unable to do so. Members of the staff and council are also reminded to please enter and exit through the ante-rooms on the upper doors of the gallery. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, today there are none.
No. What do you want?
That's Councillor Partridge. What would you like? Oh, we got some training to do with you.
I'm untrainable.
So, yeah, I agree. I just wanted to let everyone know, for quorum purposes, that I do need to take my dad to an appointment at 3 o'clock, so I'll be leaving shortly before that. Thank you.
We're going to be finished by then. Madam, or Councillor Pearson.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, thank you. And I also want to just advise for quorum purpose that at 10 o'clock I have to scoot out real quick for a formal consultation meeting of a development in my ward.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Collins.
You have me till this evening.
That's perfect. You do.
That jinxed it. That jinxed it.
We're going to move this along today if we can. Okay, can I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Pearson, seconded by Johnson. All in favor? Carried. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3. Can I have a motion to approve the August 9th and August 14th meeting minutes as presented? Moved by Vanderbeek, seconded by Partridge. All in favor? Carried. Consent items. Can I have a motion to receive items 5.1 and 5.3? Moved by Pearson, seconded by Connolly. All in favor? And a motion to approve 5.2. Moved by Scully, seconded by Marula. All in favor? Carried. Let's move on now to minutes of various advisory committee minutes. We've done that. Public hearings and delegations. Yeah. Stay with me, Judy, and I'll lead you to the promised land. Okay, public hearings and delegations. And so we have Ann Pearson and Gerald Reppold of the Gandhi Peace Festival in the United Nations Association of Canada, Hamilton branch, respecting the Gandhi Peace Festival, and to introduce a book about Hamilton's peace history. So I'd like to call upon Ann Pearson and Gail to come forward to speak to item 6.1 if they're in the audience. There they are. Come right to the podium, please.
Good morning, fellow Pearson. No, I'm from Ottawa, actually.
So if you could just introduce yourself before you start, I would appreciate that.
Of course.
And welcome.
All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Ann Pearson. I'm the President of the United Nations Association Hamilton branch and also the chair of the Gandhi Peace Festival Organizing Committee. So thank you very much for allowing us to inform you today about activities and events that are part of the 25th anniversary of the Gandhi Peace Festival. Yes, 25. And the work of the Culture of Peace Hamilton. We are not just a city of waterfalls. We are a city of peace. Being known as a city of peace is an aspirational goal that makes a statement about who we are becoming. Developing a culture of peace is the only substantive way to reach the goal of having Hamilton to be the best place to raise a child. Understanding in concrete terms what it takes to have a culture of peace leads to making decisions and taking actions that move the city forward towards it. People too often think of peace in a passive way as simply the absence of war or armed conflict. But what is called positive peace is much more than that. It is a holistic concept with a long-term agenda that focuses on enacting the prerequisites for a sustainable peace. Peace can only exist when people's basic needs are met. As Gandhi said, poverty is the worst form of violence. Where human rights are respected and protected, where people manage their conflicts constructively and are interacting nonviolently, creating a culture of peace demands action. Across Canada, Hamilton is becoming widely known for its leadership in peace and social justice. We hear that from people we meet in various places, the oddest places, a national park in Nova Scotia, for example. In the early 1980s, Hamilton was declared a nuclear weapons-free zone by Hamilton City Council, and several mayors, including the present one, have signed the Declaration of Mayors for Peace initiated by the mayor of Nagasaki to ban all nuclear weapons. In 2013, Hamilton City Council approved and named Hamilton as a city of peace. A peace garden and statue of Mahatma Gandhi are now part of the grounds of City Hall. For 17 years, the Culture of Peace Hamilton has been an active presence in the city. In 1991, McMaster University created one of the first peace studies programs in Canada. In the early 2000s, the Hamilton Centre for Civic Inclusion was created following Mayor Wade's efforts to convene the Strengthening Hamilton Community Initiative after the events of 9/11 and the torching of the Hindu temple in our city by arsonists on 9/15 in 2001. We note other significant efforts and milestones that contribute to the creation of positive peace and to addressing some of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, including establishing the Hamilton Roundtable on poverty reduction, Hamilton being selected as a pilot for the $15 minimum wage, the creation of transgender protocols, Council's recent steps to provide supported housing, the LRT as a way to both address accessibility and environmental issues. And this year, on September 30th, we are celebrating 25 years of the Gandhi Peace Festival, which has been supported by grants from the city for many years. We are grateful for this enduring financial and moral support. As part of the commemoration of the 25th anniversary, we have brought to Hamilton a special exhibition of rare photographs of Gandhi. This exhibit opens at the York Street main branch of the Hamilton Public Library on September 24th. On October 1st, we are co-sponsoring a day-long conference on education for our times at McMaster Innovation Park, and the public is welcome to that. On October 2nd, we are hosting famous Indian actress and women's rights activist, Ms. Shabana Azmi, who will be giving the annual McMaster University Gandhi Lecture on Nonviolence. Finally, this fall, we are also pleased to note that the Gandhi Peace Festival and the United Nations Association Hamilton Branch are publishing an illustrated history of peace efforts in Hamilton called Waging Peace in Hamilton. Funding for this book project, by the way, was received from the Hamilton Community Foundation's Fund for Canada 150. I'll turn to my colleague, Gail Rappold.
Thanks, Anne. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with councillors and with staff.
Can you just introduce yourself too?
I'm Gail Rappold. I'm
Thanks.
with Culture Peace Hamilton and on the board of United Nations Association in Canada Hamilton Branch. I wanted to begin by thanking the staff in this city. Culture Peace has worked over 17 years, and we have had incredible support and positive work from a number of city staff, including the staff who helped us get ready for this morning. And I'm a public sector worker in my former life myself, and I'm so thoughtful about some of the attitudes that are out there and how wrong they are in terms of what you really get when you call here and the kind of help and support and positive attitude that we've experienced. So I would be remiss if I didn't begin by saying that in public in front of the councillors.
Okay.
I would like to draw your attention to the material in front of you. You'll see that you have an outline of the Gandhi Peace Festival, a poster that refers in detail to all the things that Anne mentioned. And on the back, you'll find the United Nations Sustainability Goals. And I'm pleased to say that from a culture of peace standpoint, we're thrilled to see that Council has actually acted on some of them, like that one. And as Anne mentioned, the gender equality one, and working on the zero hunger one. Whoops, sorry. And no poverty one.
Just hold the base as you're pulling it up so it'll stay. Okay.
As you look at that page, though, you'll see that there's a lot of work left to do. I would like to invite you publicly at 1 o'clock on Thursday, September 21st, which is the International Day of Peace, and Ray Cunnington spoke to you last year at that actual day, September 21st. You're all welcome to join a group of people from various peace and social justice groups in the forecourt for lunch at 1. And we look forward to seeing any city staff or councillors who would be able to attend. We will be discussing the sustainability goals and how Hamilton's moving forward, not only at this level, but various social justice and peace groups, and them announcing their accomplishments and talking about their dreams going forward. There will also be on Monday evening, October the 23rd, to celebrate United Nations Day in this city, at the Unitarian Church at 7:30, Patricia Pearson will be speaking and introducing a book which honors all the Pearson Peace Medals in Canada. And so that's another activity that is certainly open to the public, and you're all welcome to attend. But my parting words for you this morning are about your leadership as councillors and your willingness and efforts to demonstrate and lead us toward a culture of peace. Because as Anne has talked about, a culture of peace requires positive action. And every single one of those 17 things on that colored sheet needs to be acted on if we are actually going to have a city that is the best place to raise a child. So what actions can you take as councillors to lead? How will you work to create a culture of peace? How will you demonstrate your commitment to that around this table and in your day-to-day work? You've done many things already, as Anne has said. Your own work here, how you operate with each other, how the public sees you. And as we move in this coming year into an election year for municipalities, what will we see in your literature? What will we hear in your talks that will allow us to be able to go out and say, oh yes, support so-and-so because they absolutely understand what a culture of peace is, and here's the way they're working toward it. So that's our little commercial for you this morning. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much to both Anne and Gail. So Councillor Aidan Johnson.
Thank you very much. Anne and Gail both do a ton in the community, both in the context of their peace work and in other activities. So I'd just like to thank them publicly. And a quick question that might help sort of elucidate the point they've been making. You've talked about good examples of things we can do to create a culture of peace. But just for clarity, what is a culture of peace? What is the culture that we're trying to create through these activities and initiatives?
Well, I tried to say a little bit about that in my remarks. A culture of peace is one that enables every individual in a community to be able to rise to whatever their potential is. So it creates those conditions that enable that to happen. So as long as you have poverty in a city, as long as you have situations where children can't access higher education, whatever the barriers are that prevent any child from being able to be the person that they ought to be, that is preventing a culture of peace from emerging. So it's really about building an inclusive society and an enabling one. So it's not just a city, the best place to raise a child, but really the best place in which a child is enabled to become who he or she wishes to be and can be, in simple words.
One thing I'd add to that, I think socioeconomic inequity generates the opposite of a culture of peace. I mean, if you have people who feel deprived and angry, then they are not going to be in a mood to be peaceful. So I think going back to Gandhi's words, poverty is the most significant form of violence. I mean, that sounds very ethereal and conceptual, but if you bring it down to the day-to-day of break and enter, or people with a drug addiction who steal to survive, then you see, I think, that it's very concrete when Gandhi says poverty is the most serious form of violence. Does that answer your question, Aidan?
It's a very excellent start, and thank you to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you to the presenters who may or may not know, but I had the privilege last year of traveling to Quito, Ecuador for the Habitat 3 conference. It's a once-in-a-20-year United Nations conference which laid out the new urban agenda, which I'm looking forward to presenting in its entirety later on, and perhaps in partnership with the work that you guys are doing. But I did want to make this comment that the peace process, or the culture of peace, is not just the absence of violence, but also the presence of justice. And when we're talking about economic inequalities, it's not just people living in poverty who perhaps are led to violence. We have a system in place where some of the most wealthy, well-to-do people are also economically violent in ways that we have to reconcile and address. So I don't want to leave that out, because sometimes people think that the violence is only coming from the most vulnerable, or the working class, or the working poor, or the unemployed. It's also on the other side. But I appreciate you guys bringing this in today, because it's an apt reminder of the work that we do daily. These types of projects that are laid out in an international space, in a conceptual space, in a global policy type convention, really happen in city centers. They happen on the streets. They happen in local communities, and I would agree that a lot of the things that we do around this council line up with the SDG goals, and we don't even know it. So I appreciate that recognition and look forward to seeing this unfold in the weeks to come. Thank you.
Okay, I have no more speakers. I need a motion to receive the presentation. Moved by Vanderbeek, seconded by Pearson. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. Great presentation. We'll now move on to item 6.2. which is Terry Charters and the Very Reverend Peter Wall, Anglican Diocese of Niagara, respecting the potential purchase of the parking lot next to the adjoining church at 252 James Street North. And I'd like to call upon Terry Charters and the Very Reverend Peter Wall to speak to on this item. So good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Deputy Mayor, members of council.
Typically,
staff.
we allow 5 minutes for these presentations. I give the last group a little latitude,
It's about the length of a sermon, Mr. Deputy Mayor, so that's just great. My name's Peter Wall. I'm the Dean of the Diocese of Niagara and the Rector of Christ Church Cathedral on James Street North. Terry Charters is with me. Terry's a member of the Congregation of St. Michael's on the mountain and is the coordinator of the Cathedral Place Revitalization Project. I want to say, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you to Councillor Partridge, that while the Deputy Mayor promised you the promised land, I'm told that I have an inn upstairs. I can get you there quicker and better. So for 180 years plus, Christ Church Cathedral has served this city and this diocese. It is a place of significant outreach and significant community involvement, as you know. It is the home of the Synod Office of the Diocese of Niagara. It is home to a very large and very active and important daycare center. It serves the community through a number of ways. It's been a very strong proponent of the massive transformation of James Street North, and Jamesville was one of the first places for art crawl, and indeed the weekend that we're looking forward to, which is going to be sunny, evidently, for super crawl, thank God. That's me too, by the way. We are in the midst of trying to figure out our future. We want to stay where we are. It's tough, it's expensive. We have a beautiful building that is heritage designated both inside and outside, and we work very hard to maintain that beautiful place. We have a second building that has the exterior facade on the James Street side also designated, but not the interior. And we have a parking lot at the back on the east side of the property. For the last 60 years or so, we've been driving over the original 762 people buried under that parking lot in Hamilton's oldest cemetery. We have indeed, we've been parking on top of them. So we are trying to do something about our sustainability, about our presence in the city, and we are looking to work with a developer to revitalize our property and to develop the east end of the property. That begins with the remediation of the cemetery, which is a large and complicated process. Probably will be, according to what experts have told me, the largest cemetery remediation in the province's history if it happens. We believe that there are still the remains of between 300 and 400 people buried under the parking lot. And there is a very extensive process through which we go to remediate that land. We want to build highest use condominiums, redevelop the schoolhouse building, which is the building on the north side of the property, redevelop the space for the daycare, the space for gathering, the space for the community, include both commercial and retail space, and new offices for both the diocese and for the cathedral, while maintaining untouched, or as untouched as you can in that kind of construction process, the cathedral itself. In order to do that, we need to expand our footprint just a little, and we have been talking, as you know, for quite some time with the city about the parking lot on the south side of our parking lot, the small municipal lot that fronts onto Houston Street. And indeed, we are grateful that Council in the spring unanimously supported our right to purchase that particular parking lot. The addition of that land to our footprint gives us the opportunity to do something that is significant and important, both from the point of view of the intensification and densification of James Street North and Jamesville. We are aware of the presence of the new Harbour West GO train station and what that means in terms of the downtown community. It gives us an opportunity to develop a community that is even larger and more diverse around us, and enables us ultimately to be able to stay where we are and to continue to be the kind of place that we have been for 180 years, and to continue to provide not only Christian ministry, but a whole lot of much, much more important community ministry out of those buildings and for the community that surrounds us. We know that one of the roles of this group is to determine a price for that parking lot. We're going to ask you to be generous, to see yourselves as partners with us, to realize that we all gain from the kind of work that we're going to do, that we are committed to being strong partners with the city and with our neighbors, with the merchants, with the people who live in the neighborhood, and that we want to invite you to be part of that with us. We are dealing with all the bottom lines and the sharp pencils and the numbers that are involved in this kind of business. This is not what I went to seminary for, I need to tell you, but it's amazing what you learn if you live long enough. And it's a really exciting thing for us to do, and I'm deeply personally committed, along with the bishop, to making sure that we do the best job we can being the best kind of citizens we can. And that little parking lot is a key piece of this. So your decisions about this are very important to us. So that's why we're here. You have a fact sheet that we prepared for you about what this means, what this is going to look like. Terry and I are quite happy to answer any questions, and I know that you've got lots of work to do and decisions to make, and I don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. We have first speaker is Councillor Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you and all of council. The parking lot being referenced was an underperformer comparatively. We have about 17 surface lots, or had about 17 surface lots in the core. After operating and maintenance, this one is a little tucked away, out of the way, off the beaten path, and obviously extremely important to this greater good project that has been, through you, Chair, to the very Reverend Peter Wall, approved by everyone in the diocese, right? You're not just up here willy-nilly. You've gone a long way over a few years to get to this point.
No, I used to look a lot younger than I do now when I was still willy-nilly. No, we have the Synod of the Diocese, which is the governing body of the diocese being, you know, all of the peninsula, Guelph, Oakville, Shelburne, sort of an L shape that goes up 100 parishes. The Synod has approved this in principle. The Synod understands that Cathedral Place revitalization is significant not only for us here in Hamilton but for the diocese, and they have approved every step of the way. We've taken it back to Synod. We have another Synod in November, and they have approved. They've approved that we do it. They've approved that we work with developers. They've approved a certain amount of value that we have in the land, and they are looking forward to the next steps unfolding.
So, and I know you were grateful. It was a unanimous decision of council to exclusively offer up this small lot to make this greater good project work. And I was happy to play a role in that, and I'm actually still quite active in looking at other opportunities through an RFP process or otherwise for other non-performers or break-even surface parking lots in the very heart of our city that we manage. And I'm grateful for council's support on that over 5 or so years through you, and to that point, when we first sat down, it wasn't Ray Kessler, it was a gentleman and a scholar and our lead in real estate. It was Bill Farkas, it was Tim McCabe, and many others in the room. How long ago was it when we first talked about the value of this particular lot to your project and to the city?
Well, I was trying to think of that last night. I think it was 4 years ago.
Wow, okay. And through you, you're in the heart of it and in the thick of it right there on James Street North. Real estate, would you agree, has changed dramatically in that time?
Yes.
And therefore, through you, Chair, the value of that small little parcel?
Yes.
And to, Peter, get to the crux through you, Chair, of what you're asking for here today is simply, would we contemplate some break and quite possibly contemplate that when we all sat in that room and I agreed to go forward on your behalf and staff gave me the thumbs up to move forward on your behalf 4 or more years ago to offer you a market rate at this particular lot, that you're asking us here today to consider a break for this greater good through you, Chair?
Yes, that would be what we would be asking. Thank you.
Okay. Currently, as an institutional use on the property, which is the bulk of this property, you pay no taxes through you, Chair?
That's correct.
This particular project, once complete, and I thank you for the fact sheet, approximately where we get nothing now, and again, the lot we unanimously agreed to offer exclusively in the past, pretty much break even. If not, I think maybe a money loser, but we weren't cleaning up on it, that's for sure. We would get approximately, Peter, $500K annually in taxes through you, Chair, or did I read that right?
Yeah, that's the number that we have used. I want to say, candidly, I think that's probably a little high. I think it might be closer to $400K. Depends on the tax rate, obviously, and depends on the actual final number of condominiums that there are.
Okay.
The current plan is about 110, 116, something like that. So.
Okay.
It's a significant amount of money, a tax revenue that would be generated, yes.
So there'll be a collective sigh of relief when I say what I'm about to say from my colleagues around this table. I'm not interested in moving any further or trying to dicker on the fly at this point, but I would be interested, once all the questions and comments have been asked, to the very Reverend Peter Wall to move a motion to refer the item to staff and have them report back, hopefully, to the next available GIC on some of the options we may entertain to get to a point where both parties are satisfied, ultimately breaking ground after a very lengthy and expensive remediation that we've learned about and perhaps will be the story after today. Something where we can contemplate where we can make some gesture towards the greater good and ultimately 500,000 annualized for all-time revenue where we're currently receiving zero. So if you'll come back to me,
Yep,
I'll
I'll come
refer.
back to you after the next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And but the Reverend's going to have his hands full over the next little while trying to get Councillor Partridge to the promised land, though.
I know it's not easy.
Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and the very Reverend Peter and I have worked on many projects together, so I think he knows what that would entail. I would be very pleased to second the motion to refer this to staff, absolutely. You know, the good that Christ Church Cathedral does to the greater city of Hamilton is really, it's quite significant. And it does reach outside of the boundaries of James Street quite a bit. My question, Chair, through you is, I just want to make sure that I heard correctly. So the parking lot currently sits over top of quite a few grave sites at this point. Is that
Yes,
correct?
the original Hamilton Cemetery was opened in 1832.
Right.
Behind what is now the cathedral. It was closed in 1852.
Wow.
The York Street Cemetery was opened in 1860. There were 762 people buried in that cemetery in that 22-year period. What we know, we have the names of about 750 of them.
Wow.
55% of them were under 20 years of age.
Incredible.
In the course of the last 150 years, first of all, the myth when I came to the cathedral 20 years ago, and I realized fairly soon on that it was a myth, that all the bodies had been moved. And I thought, wouldn't that have been interesting? It must have been quite a truck in 1860 that just pulled up to the back of Houston Street and loaded all those bodies. What had happened, of course, is that when the Hamilton Cemetery was opened in 1860, there was a Christ Church Cathedral section, a McNabb Presbyterian section, and they moved a bunch of the stones. There was a large, significant construction on the site in 1895, another one in 1925, another one in 1960. In 1905, the Beasley Memorial, to Hamilton's first citizen, was created in the parking lot, and that is still there, and some remains were put into that place, and that in the plan for the revitalization stays. It's also a UEL designated site. But while in 1925 and I think in 1960, the construction people found bones and threw them into a dumpster, and I'm not trying to be
No, that's fair.
I'm trying to be candid here. Those kinds of things don't happen anymore.
Right.
We've had archaeologists do ground penetrating radar, and we know that there are burial shafts, and we've found on the radar coffin nails and handles and things. So the province has very strict regulations about what we do. You start out with a teaspoon and a tea strainer, and you go through it all, and we then need to identify a mass as much as we can, known remains, reverentially and appropriately reinter or bury them. And that's a big mystery about how that all happens. One of the critical pieces for us is that when that starts, we want the whole thing to continue, because we immediately lose all of our parking when we start on the parking lot. And we want it to be a through composed piece, so that we do the 3 or 4 months of the remediation, and then immediately we're into building, so that we're not rendering the parking lot unusable for 3 or 4 months, and then we sit for another 2 years waiting for something else to happen, because once it's remediated, we clearly can't park on it. And I'm one of those people that believes that it's time that we stopped parking on top of those 300 or 400 people. I don't think they're having a great time, and I think they need to be released from asphalt hell.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because I mean, I certainly agree with that 100%. It's, you know, it's something that is just the right thing to do. And my question was going to be, Chair, around the remediation process, but you've pretty much answered that. So
As much as I know about it, it's quite complex. That's what I know about it at the moment.
Yeah, and I would assume, and perhaps I'll ask this question to Jason Thorne after you're finished, but I would assume that there'll be some archaeological studies that will need to be done, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess my final question, Chair, is when you do the remediation, where will the remains be interned? Will they?
Another good question. It depends to a certain extent on what the province says. I jokingly said to a colleague of mine whose parish has a cemetery in the thriving metropolis of York, Ontario. One day about 3 years ago, I said, "Would you sell me 200 graves?" Her eyes lit up. She said, "I certainly will." And I said, "If I'm going to buy 200, I want a deal." And I mean, it was a joke, but some of them will have to be reburied. You have to advertise across the country for next of kin. We have a columbarium at the cathedral that is a separately licensed new cemetery in the crypt of the cathedral. And the possibility would exist that we would take some of those niches and cremate some of the remains and put some in there. First of all, we need to know how many we have, and then there would be determinations by the ministry, by the ministries and the coroner's office and everything involved in how we then identify them, and then how we then reinter them. It's quite complex, and it's interesting, but it's a little overwhelming.
Well, it is, certainly, and being a history buff myself, I find it fascinating, but even the concept, but absolutely the process that you need to go through.
We may find some under your parking lot as well.
Well, yeah, and with the city being as old as it is, I'm sure that isn't the only situation. We probably have a great many issues like that. But thank you very much for that. And Chair, if you'll come back to me once the questions are finished, I would like to ask one of our General Manager of Planning. Thank you.
Okay, I have no more questionnaires, so I need a motion to receive the presentation. Moved by Johnson, seconded by Vanderbeek. All in favor, carried. Thank you very much for coming. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you very much.
And I'll go to Councillor Partridge for a question to staff before I go to Councillor Farr.
Thank you, Chair. And so my question to Jason is, in terms of the process going forward, you've heard a little bit about, where we are at this point, and certainly what the wish list and the plan could be going forward. What kinds of studies? I'm assuming archaeological study would need to be done, and I'm assuming that you've been involved in some of these discussions. If you could just unpack that a bit for us, please.
Yes, through the chair. On the planning side, they have been in for an initial formal consultation on what their plans would be, and so that has identified all the various studies that would be required, and yes, archaeology is one of them. And we actually have guidelines in terms of what standard those archaeology plans have to be done to. And they'd also have to meet provincial requirements if there are, as the delegate was saying, if there's bodies under the ground, then I believe it's the Provincial Cemeteries Act that actually dictates how that gets dealt with. So that would have to be covered as part of the planning. Other than that, it'd be the usual list of studies we'd be requiring, looking at traffic, looking at sun shadow impacts, wind studies, those sorts of things that are typical for an infill development, an urban design brief, servicing, all the typical studies that would have to go along with the planning application would have to be part of this.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Farr, you'd like to make a motion then refer this to staff, seconded by Councillor Partridge?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Whereas the future project at Cathedral Place will generate approximately $500K annually in new tax revenue through the residential portion of the project, where no annual tax revenue is currently collected. Once complete, whereas the project now through the planning process will sustain Cathedral Place and maintain the community hub that has been established at Cathedral Place, supporting initiatives like the Makers Market. Therefore, be it resolved that the appropriate staff report back, and I got the date confirmed with Real Estate and Stephanie, to the October 4th GIC on options with respect to the request by the diocese in the reduction of the purchase price of the municipal parking lot adjacent to Cathedral Place, and important overall to this project.
Okay, so you're asking for a report back by October 4th?
On October 4th, thank you.
Mr. Kessler, is that okay? Can you do that? Okay, so it's been duly moved and seconded. Staff are in agreement. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? The motion carries unanimously. Congratulations. We'll now move on to discussion items, and the first one is the Assessment Act, providing a property tax exemption to nonprofit long-term care homes. Is there any discussion on this item? 8.1. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor. You're seeing here in the executive summary reports that the extension by the province to the LTCs is resulting in $1 million loss to the city off of our tax roll. I'm just wondering if maybe Mike can provide context. Are there any ways that we can find any type of relief or remedy from the province? It feels like we got our pockets picked here.
Mike?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, you'll recall that staff initially brought this forward to Council in September of 2016. The province amended legislation regulation making for not-for-profit long-term care homes being property tax exempt. And what that really translates into is financial relief to the provinces. The province of Ontario previously assumed 85% of that burden. 85% of property taxes for not-for-profit long-term care homes were subsidized by the province of Ontario, and therefore, through the exemption of property taxes for these facilities, it effectively reduced the financial costs to the province. And hence, staff put forward a recommendation, and Council endorsed that recommendation, asking the province of Ontario to extend the mitigation practice that was in place. The province said in 2016 it would mitigate the impact to municipalities. The City of Hamilton was mitigated in 2016. We asked that it be extended. The report before you today informs us that they are extending it for 2017, so that's positive. That will be reported through our variance report for 2017. And once again, we're asking, our staff are recommending that the mayor correspond with the Minister of Finance, requesting that the province continue to extend the transition mitigation payment. That is currently, that's our only recourse. There are no other transfer payment programs or other programs whereby we could look to try to mitigate the impact of the lost property tax revenue, and hence staff are suggesting or recommending that the transition period be extended to allow municipalities like the City of Hamilton to identify other means or measures to mitigate the impact locally.
You know, it's tough not to be cynical when you see this type of stuff, because you know that a lot of these facilities are already underfunded as it is. We know that there's a huge burden. We sit on community emergency services through our ambulatory care, and the shuffling back and forth between long-term care facilities and hospitals. And we know about the code zeros with our ambulances being tied into these hospitals. And so I'm looking at this file, and I know Councilor Marula will speak at length about downloading, but this is like a sleight of hand trick right here, where they take this away. And so you said 85% subsidies from the province. What's the city's obligation in LTCs? What do we pick? Because, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I want to qualify that question. It's often the case, I feel, at community emergency services where there's a crisis that'll happen in the social sector, and we'll come and run to save it. So they'll cut funding in a very kind of insidious way somewhere, and it creates a shuffle. And then the city comes off the tax roll and ends up backstopping a lot of these programs and services. So as it relates to LTCs, what is our responsibility there, and how much are we taking off of our general levy to support LTCs if there's that 15% gap?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the City of Hamilton continues to provide the services to these four. It was 4 affected properties, and they're listed on page 3 of 4. We continue to provide the services that these property owners would have received previously. So we continue to provide them the traditional city services, and whether it's given the nature of the business, whether it's ambulatory or street lighting or waste.
Mr. Deputy, I want to be more specific, because it wasn't on necessarily the capital side. It's often at community emergency services we are directly funding social sector programs off the general levy with special funds that we bring out in the 12th hour to bail people out or to bail out these organizations. I know we see it a lot with, the new funding that we've put forward for residential care facilities and so on and so forth. So if the province is funding these not-for-profits at 85%, direct funding, does the city have any direct funding off our general levy to these LTCs?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'm not aware that they are recipients. Again, these are long-term care facilities,
Sure.
and so I'm not aware that they are receiving any subsidy either through community emergency services directly or through other city programs. But in terms of the 1%, $1 million impact, you'll recall that when we presented our assessment growth information to you, this was one of the factors that we identified as reducing our assessment growth. So it reduced some of that positive assessment growth that we have realized in 2016 and 17. So again, the impact to taxpayers, local taxpayers, with respect to these types of actions by the province of Ontario is that burden gets distributed by all the existing taxpayers. And so it's really a transfer of burden onto other taxpayers.
Well, this is where I'm at, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and why I ask these questions and why this report is so important. Because we know from a demographic perspective, from an actuarial perspective, there's going to be a greater need for LTCs in the next 10 to 15 years than there's ever been. We know that as a municipality, we have control to some extent over some of our zoning and planning. I can only imagine or predict that there's going to be a higher demand for LTCs, which would mean we're actually going to go from 4 to who knows in the next 10 years how many properties we're going to be converting from multi-res to LTC scenarios. Because I hear the province in another shift in, I don't know how the policy will shift out, but this idea of place-based care, keeping people in their homes, keeping people out of hospitals, that makes sense to me. I understand that. But what I don't understand is if they're now shifting the burden onto municipalities by taking away that tax base and eroding them, because these are not small buildings, right? Like if they're 4 properties, the average units in them they're multi-unit properties. So, this is something I think as a council we need to keep a close eye on, because I could only predict there's going to be more transition into the LTC model, which would mean an even greater burden or offset on our tax base. So I appreciate staff for coming back on this. I have it flagged here. I have it flagged now in community emergency services, and I have it flagged in planning, because we're going to have applications coming now with this booming market of long-term care, understaffed and underfunded by the province, but still very profitable for the private sector. Even if it's not for profit, it's still a profitable model. You're going to see a lot more of our properties being converted into LTCs, and it's going to represent a bigger tax burden on our general levy. So just something for people to keep a close eye on. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to I expect Mike, but it might be somebody else. So we were told in 2016 that this was happening. We were told they would be mitigating some of it in 2016. They've now said they're going to be mitigating some of it in 2017. Who's making a plan for 18 plus? Like, is there somebody actively looking at what the plan is for the future, given what the previous speaker said? Because I agree with him that I think this is going to be an ever-growing issue, given even if you just look at the demographics in the population at this point. And so my question is, there's no guarantee that we're going to have anything in 18, 19, 20, et cetera. Are we looking at what we can do about that?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I think there are 2 parts to that question, so I'll approach it with 2 answers. It's specific to these 4 properties, the commitment from the province, and it's through Ministry of Finance, is to extend the mitigation into 2017. Beyond 2017, we have no commitment with respect to these 4 properties. I think what Councillor Green was speaking to and Councillor Vanderbeek identified is this could be a growing trend by the province of Ontario. So as the province of Ontario looks to other institutional partners and how to relieve some financial burden or cost with respect to those institutional partners, and whether it is other LTC operators, potentially for-profit LTC operators, or similarly, whether it is other institutional operators, is the concern would be that the province of Ontario would enact similar relief exemption, and that would simply be transferring the burden on to local municipalities. And so we've had at the staff level, between municipal representatives and provincial representatives, we started to have these conversations, and we've raised our concerns, alarms with respect to the trend and the potential of a growing trend, given that it erodes at our tax base while we're facing other challenges with respect to some of our other sectors. So at the staff level, we are having these conversations, and in the recommendations of the report, we're suggesting that the mayor forward a correspondence on to the Minister of Finance asking that, with specific to these 4 properties, that there be an extended mitigation period, and going forward, if we hear of any other considerations extending this practice to other property types, we would bring that information forward to council. But again, it's something that is on the radar of other treasurers, myself and other treasurers in the province, just the concern that this could be a form of relief that the province would extend to institutional partners in the province that would simply be a transfer of burden onto local municipalities.
Thank you.
Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And this is very worrisome. You know, we seem to get hit every year with surprises like this that just tend to come out of nowhere. And both previous speakers did ask the questions that I was going to ask, but I want to dig just a little bit deeper on it. And Mike, you said that, through you, Chair, that you're meeting with treasurers from other municipalities. There is a concern, and you are working on a plan, but this report really is just for the mayor to send a letter to the Minister of Finance asking for an extension. My question is, are we going to ask for a specific time frame? Are we looking for a 5-year extension? Are we looking for are we going to propose a transitional plan as opposed to waiting for the province to come back with us with some suggestions?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the recommendation doesn't specify a transition plan, but if it's the will of committee to amend the recommendation, it may be reasonable to extend it through this reassessment period, so being 2017 through to 2020. And so that may be a consideration of committee, is to amend recommendation B to reference through this reassessment period, which would be 2017, 18, 19, and 20.
And I thank you for that, because I would like to make that amendment, if Madam Clerk could just make note of what Mike just said, and Chair, if you'll come back to me on that. But I do have other questions. So, Mike, with regards to the 4 locations, facilities that are identified, it doesn't include our own long-term care, Macassa and Wentworth Lodge. Is that correct? And why?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, it doesn't include those as they've targeted this for not-for-profit long-term care facilities. And so within the city of Hamilton, our geographic boundary, it is the 4 facilities, St. Peter's, Heritage Green, Leona Local, 837, and Sons of Italy, that are the 4 affected not-for-profit long-term care operators.
Okay, and so our own 2 pay taxes, do not pay taxes?
For you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'd have to check to see whether they, I'm assuming they pay taxes. I don't believe, committee may recall from time to time, we deem municipal administrative assets as municipal capital facilities and make them exempt. I don't believe that's the case with respect to Macassa and Wentworth Lodge, but I can confirm that.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, Chair, is with regards to these 4 now being exempt, how does that tie in with other healthcare facilities within our region? Because we do have a number of hospitals, they don't pay taxes. Is that correct?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the Hospitals are grouped in with education providers. They pay what we refer to as heads and beds. And heads and beds, the legislation regulation may go back as, I know the current rate is $75 per head of bed. So that is per full-time student or per hospital bed. Was set in place in 1987 and hasn't been adjusted since that time. So we haven't benefited, municipalities haven't benefited simply from the indexing of that amount, nor an adjustment, and that's been a reoccurring subject with municipalities across this province and the province of Ontario with respect to some form of amendment to better reflect the cost of services municipalities are providing to those institutional partners. So again, they don't fall under the same tax mechanism.
Right.
They fall under what we refer to as heads and beds.
Thank you for that, unless there are further changes being contemplated that, we don't know about. But I think that's certainly something that we should address at some point in time, and perhaps the appropriate place, Chair, would be through Emergency and Community Services. Thank you.
Councillor Wade.
Thank you. Just dovetailing on some of the great questions that have been asked. I know for a fact that there are some RCFs now that are in the process of becoming long-term care facilities. In some cases, they're hybrids, and they have a decision to make. So I guess the question that's been sort of asked, but I know this from a different perspective, this list could be expanded. There's no limitations from the province at this point in time, is there?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I think that's what I was alluding to. As the province looks, whether it's residential care facilities, long-term care facilities, as they look to forms of relief, financial relief to those stakeholders, we're concerned, municipalities are concerned that they will turn to this form of relief, and that is to remove property tax burden, to make them property tax exempt, and that just simply transfers that cost or burden to other property owners within our boundaries. And so that is a decision of the province. It can be made unilaterally, and our concern would be that the province would look to those types of policy decisions, and again, that would simply transfer on some of that financial burden or cost to our local taxpayers.
Was there any consultations with any aspect, staff, treasurers across the province of municipalities in respect to the prior to the initiation of this policy by the province of Ontario?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, as I recall it, I believe this was referenced in a budget document, and there was some initial reference to it. But I think what occurred, as I recall, the fall of 2016, this caught municipalities by surprise. There were many municipalities, frankly, by the fall who were well into their budget deliberations and already had set their 2017 budgets, and were dealing with these changes mid-year after they already set their budgets. So it would suggest to me that municipalities were caught by surprise by the action by the province. But I believe it was referenced in possibly a 2014-15 budget document as a consideration, not as a definitive action, but as a consideration.
Yeah, normally considerations, you embark on consultation with stakeholders, understand the impact before you implement. So I'm trying to understand between AMO, the treasurers or the CEOs of municipalities across Ontario, there's usually a point of consultation with the driving ministry in respect to some of those policies. What I'm hearing now is that there was absolutely no consultation with municipalities in that regard. Is that correct?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, again, it was referenced, in fact, in the 2014 budget. I wasn't involved in any direct consultation. I'm not aware of other city staff who were directly involved. Again, in terms of following AMO updates, I'm not aware that this was deliberated, discussed between AMO and the ministry. But again, I wasn't directly involved in any consultation.
Appreciate it. I just want to highlight the fact that when you have significant policy shifts that impact stakeholders, that I believe that the province has a moral responsibility to consult with those stakeholders. We may not agree to disagree, or we may agree to disagree, but at the end of the day, understanding the implications case by case, municipality by municipality, helps inform those decisions. And it appears in this particular case that certainly did not happen. So now we're sort of chasing this policy after the fact and after the implementation. And we still haven't quantified, maybe from the City of Hamilton, I'm not sure, but have you seen any documents through AMO or other organizations that have put out that have quantified the impacts on municipalities as a result of this policy?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'm not aware of what the overall provincial impact for the City of Hamilton as identified in the report. It's approximately $972,000 in foregone tax revenue that needs to be offset by existing property tax owners. So again, for one municipality, our municipality is just short of $1 million. I'm not sure what the overall impact across the province of Ontario is.
So, and just to make sure, and this is for public record and clear, of course, taxes go towards services. So it's not like the services for snow removal, garbage pickup, policing, fire, etc., will be excluded from those particular consumers of those services. Is that correct?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I believe, so the shorter answer is that's correct. These properties will continue to be recipients of municipal services. But what we also, staff also identified is that the savings were not being transferred on to the operators of the long-term care facilities in an effort to provide them additional funding as it relates to the services they are providing, that the savings were really being clawed back by the province to assist them with their financial challenges.
I appreciate that. So here we go. We have consumers of many services community not paying for those services as tantamount to, I think Councilor Miller's coined the phrase in respect to Hamilton as yet another form of downloading. And then you top that up with the fact that Hamilton is being designated as a regional healthcare center serving over 2.2 million people who travel or are part of a catchment that comes to Hamilton through our hospital systems using, again, a lot of the services that are provided by the residential taxpayer, and yet we only get a fraction of those dollars through heads and beds from those institutions, which again continues to build a burden on those municipalities to recoup true cost. And the challenge we have now is that those services still need to be provided. Somebody has to pay for it, so it's on the backs of our residential taxpayers. I just wanted to coin that so that that is part of the narrative that hopefully the media will catch on to. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Conley, can you take the chair for 1 second? And through you, if I can, to Mike, just so I'm clear in this, Mike, on page 2 for the report, it says we did lose approximately the $1 million in lost revenue due to this loss of assessment. But it looks like, reading that you built that into the 2017 assessment reduction. And so the transition funding that we received wasn't, in fact, used to pay for that loss. It's in a reserve fund, I expect. And it won't have any effect going forward because we already built it in 2017. Have I read that correctly?
So, so through the chair, just some corrections. There's some confusion, I think, with the time period. So 2016, we were advised of the regulatory change in September, or I believe late summer, and the province committed to mitigating the impact given the late notice of the regulatory change. So 2016, we were told of the change, and they provided us transitional funding of $970,000, 2016. For 2017, through the 2017 budget process, we identified this as an issue. It was effectively reducing our overall assessment growth. Correct. So it was one of those factors that that contributed to our lower than historical assessment growth. So effectively, by making that adjustment, you're transferring that cost or that burden onto other property owners.
Correct.
You're reducing...
Through the reduction in assessment.
Through the reduction in assessment. So that was 2017. Now, we've been advised that the mitigation period will be extended to 2017. So where the $970,000 will be reported to committee is through our variance report. So when
Okay.
we report
So
on
it'll
our
be a
variance
positive
report,
variance then.
it will contribute to our year-end position. It's favorably, and subject to where we land at year-end, committee would have options as to how to apply that.
And then the most important question is, going into 2018, we've already built it in the 2017 budget, so it doesn't have an impact going forward.
And so through the chair, that's correct. If the province were to extend the mitigation period,
That'd be
it
more
would
helpful.
allow us some flexibility into 2018, 19, and 20 if it were to be extended for this reassessment period.
Okay, I got that. I'll take the chair back if I can, and I see no more speakers, so can I have a motion to approve the recommendation that'll come to you for amendment? So who wants to move the motion? Moved by Councillor Conley, seconded by Councillor Vanderbeek, and now Councillor Partridge, you have an amendment.
Yes, I'd like to amend B, and I'll ask Madam Clerk to read it out if she would, please. Microphone.
Sorry, B as amended would read that the mayor correspond with the Honorable Charles Sousa, Minister of Finance, to request the extension of the transitional mitigation payment through this reassessment period 2017 to 2020.
That's fine, thank you. And I need a seconder for that.
Seconded by Councillor Conley.
Councillor Aidan Johnson, or Councillor Conley, yes.
You got it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, to the amendment then, there's a motion. Councillor White.
Further amend it, and any positions that we're putting forward, we copy AMO.
So you're amending your amendment then to include distribution to amendment?
Sure, I'll just add a D. I think that would be a D to circulate to all municipalities and mayor's large caucus and the and AMO, and I think that should cover it.
Are you okay with that, seconder, Councillor Conley? Okay.
Yeah,
So it's-
appreciate that, thank
That
you.
amendment's been friendly amended. So further discussion, seeing none, all in favor of the amendment? Opposed? That carries. Motion to the main motion then to approve the report as amended. All in favor? Opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Let's move on to 8.2, which is the Commonwealth Games 100th anniversary. Councillor Rula.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'd like to firstly vocally oppose what's before us. I understand it's a non-binding request, but having recollection of what we went through with the Pan Am Games, it seems like there's a framework or a process that we follow, and it's inevitably what occurs is that the first request is generally very innocuous, and then it leads to another and another and another, to ultimately we're at a point of no return and spent X amount of money, and then it's rationalized that we can't go back and change what we haven't done. So I think what we look at is, what are our priorities presently? We have the LRT file that is still open and very ambivalent at times, and so before we move forward on a major project of any kind, I think we need to finish what we have already started, and we have a number of issues that we've already started, but LRT being really the most prominent one that I can think of. And I just have to warn everyone that we're sending way too many different messages. We're doing quite well in being consistent, predictable, and not trying to create chaos. And primarily our objective is economic development. Our objective is to try to foster this renaissance that we're experiencing since 2007. And there are a couple of projects that I can think of that actually led to that renaissance. The expressway being probably the number one example of when things definitely turned around. You look at property values pre-2007 to post-2007, you look at all the activity that has occurred since 2007, there's a direct correlation of opening up that highway to the GTA and what we're experiencing today. If we were talking about a project that would in any way create or build from what we're experiencing and the success that we're experiencing today, I'd be the first one to say to you that this is something we should explore. This will be a distraction. This will create divisiveness. This will take our focus away from what we actually need to do and have people manipulate the process to try to focus in on what they want as opposed to what we need as a city. So I say we shut this down now. The old saying of we need more bread, not circuses, I think can apply. But more importantly, we need to steer the ship in a manner that's conducive to consistency, predictability, and throwing in a project of this magnitude, literally for the sport of it, no pun intended, is something I can't accept, and I strongly advise that no one accepts. Because I know that from a public perspective, after the Pan Am disaster and the stadium fiasco, and all the promises that were made about that particular event, the world stage and all that nonsense that I warned everyone about and laughed at, never came to fruition, we're going down the same road. And I just, folks, like, really, we can't repeat mistakes, because there's an old saying about that, and I like to consider myself to be quite sane. Thanks very much, Mr.
So let's stick a fork in it.
Yeah, stick a fork in it. It should be dead now.
Okay, thanks.
Or done now.
Councillor Scully.
Thank you, and echoing along the same line of Councillor Marula, I agree. I think we were promised an awful lot with the Pan Am Games, and we really didn't deliver. But I don't have a problem if we explore this. But if we are going to, if staff is going to look at this, we have to look at it without an outcome already predetermined. And if you even look at the report before us, 8.2, we've already stated in the report, there are many positive and lasting legacies from hosting these types of events in our economy, for our community, and in our lifestyle. Well, in many ways, that's already determined the outcome. If you want to make that statement, we also have to add through the chair, but at what cost? And that's the point. If we are going to ask staff to look at something like this, we have to be honest about it. We can't simply say, we'll get a lot of attention, think about the branding of the city, think about tourism, billions of dollars in eyes looking at us, at the city. Well, that's easy to say, but how do you measure that type of branding? You can't. If we are asking staff to look at this, we have to go beyond the romantic idea of we hosted the original Commonwealth Games, this is the 100th anniversary. It's much bigger than that in the sense that it's going to cost a lot of money. If you go and look at other Commonwealth Games, even the Vancouver Olympics, if you look beyond the hype, the revenue that is quoted as being generated from these games is often nothing more than taxpayer-generated revenue. It came from the taxpayer. So is it really genuinely revenue? The legacy, well, is it legacy projects? Are we here just to build more sports facilities? And again, if we're going to be doing that, echoing Councillor Marula's comment, look at the fiasco around the Pan Am Stadium. Delivered late, probably in the wrong location, but again, at what cost? We had to meet a deadline for the games. So if we are going to go down this road and ask staff to do a study on this, it can't simply be a study speaking to people with a vested interest. We need financial statements. We need an assessment of audited financial statements from other Commonwealth Games. We need a summary of the genuine legacy of the Vancouver Olympics. Did they actually deliver what they said they were going to deliver? And we need to speak to people who don't have a vested interest in the games. We need to speak to people who are truly unbiased. We also need clarity around the term revenues. Is it, again, just simply shifting money from the taxpayer and from three levels of government and calling that revenue? So I don't mind going down this road, but before we move on this recommendation, I think it needs to be fleshed out, and it needs to include a lot more specific requests in terms of true, unbiased, extensive look at the cost of putting on these games and what we can expect in terms of what they will deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And no, I'm with the first speaker on this. I think we should just deal with it today and, and not go down this road. We've got the West Harbour lands, massive project, which is going to make a significant difference to our city. The LRT, cost still unknown. We're going to be right in the thick of building that. and have, again, we don't even have a memorandum of agreement with any costs associated with it to deal with, although we're hearing we're going to see that in 2018. Again, and also binding future councils. I'm not comfortable binding future councils, and I have to agree, I think it will take the focus off of the positives that we have going for us right now. We're still dealing to this very day, and we will be continuing on for Lord knows how long. We are still dealing with the stadium issue, and we do not need another fiasco. We need to stay on solid ground, be focused on what it is we want to accomplish for our city as a council, and make those commitments and move forward. So I will be opposed to doing any further work on this. Thank you.
Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'm one of those that like to have all facts before I get confused. So this is a point of introduction. This is a point of just saying we have some interest, let's seek out some of the facts, and then make an informed decision. For a council to say we don't want any of the facts, we don't even want to show interest, is cutting your nose and spite your face. The reality is we have responsibility to get closest to the mark as we can and then make informed decisions. Now, I had the benefit of working on the Commonwealth file. I have traveled to Manchester. I know Councillor Rob Basuda has. And if you see the transformation, and we're not talking, when we talk about legacy projects, we're not just talking sports complexes. We're talking about housing. We're talking about transportation. Vancouver had the SkyTrain that was all funded. And this is another opportunity to leverage provincial and federal funds into a community to create this legacy and jumpstart or leap some of those infrastructure priorities in a community. You want to say no to the federal government and the provincial government and say, hey, let Toronto or let Markham or let some other community soak up all those taxpayers' dollars from the other levels of government and let them leap ahead, and we'll just sit here and watch and say, hey, we did the right thing. I think it's premature. There are great legacy projects in housing. Let's be careful. Nonprofit, social housing, affordable housing that comes out of these type of proposals. There's been many cases of higher order of transit for those transit lovers in communities built to accommodate the influx of guests and visitors coming into this community. And I can tell you when we held the World Cycling Championships in Hamilton, and I'm over in England watching an airport on the screen, the international profile Hamilton was getting and the beautiful vistas and vignettes that were promoting Hamilton, that's something that you wouldn't be able to afford otherwise. So it puts Hamilton and continues putting Hamilton out there. And suggest that Pan Am was a debacle, let's go back. Let's not personalize it, get into this sort of the granular, well, okay, is the stadium in the right place, wrong place? We had everyone's stadium, by the way, Empire Loyalist Games, funded through provincial and federal and municipal funds. We had Thompson Pool, again, funded by provincial and federal and city municipal coffers. Infrastructure was left as a result of the original Empire Loyalist Games. The birthplace, by the way, of the Commonwealth Games here in Hamilton. So I'm a bit confused on at least not going down the road and making an informed decision on any risk that may be concerning. But at this point, this is just about putting our name in and understanding what the federal and provincial commitments would be and so forth. For you to actually, we got Mayor, for example, in Pan Am, so back to Pan Am, so we ended up with a stadium, replacing an old stadium that we would have had to put $90 million into, 19 million residential tax dollars into, to refurbish, to reestablish, because the infrastructure of that building, we got a report, there was a report that came to council, I could produce that report to the media if they wish, that clearly indicated to refurbish the Arborwood Stadium, we would have to spend up to $19 million to do that because the concrete and the iron and all those kinds of challenges with the infrastructure. Mr. Chair, I don't know if I interrupted any other speakers.
No. Councillor Miller, Councillor Whitehead does have the floor, so if do you want to go back on the speakers list? Yes, please. You're done. Okay.
And there was a report that was brought forward, and I believe the number we could have staged it, but it was up to $90 million. So we ended up with a $150 million brand-new stadium in the city of Hamilton, which the city of Hamilton contributed, Mr. Chair, through to Mike Zagarek. What was our contribution to this stadium?
So through the chair, I'd have to recall. I can't recall if it was $45 million. I believe it was 45 with an initial commitment to the velodrome that was amended after the fact.
So the point is we leveraged other people's money that would have been spent in another community and spent it here to meet needs in this community. So and they said nothing came out of it. Well, right now it's ironic we're having this conversation because as I understand it, our mayor is in Colombia, which was a relationship that was established through the Pan Am Games right here in Hamilton. I remember the press conference at Mohawk College. And know that they're meeting with companies from Hamilton. They're looking at opportunities in sports and technology and so forth, and establishing those kinds of opportunities and employment here in the city of Hamilton. So, we could be short-sighted and put a fork in it now, or we could be visionaries and stay the course and get all the information and then make an informed decision. I only ask my council, show patience. Let's get all the information and then make the informed decision. Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Lots of passion around the table. I certainly don't disagree with many of the comments that have been made, but I can certainly tell you that as the Ward 3 councillor, which has the Pan Am precinct, as it's unfolding with the Bernie Morelli Center, the new North Hamilton High School, hopefully potentially the Dom Glass Fields, I could tell you that I am open to exploring in a preliminary way what programming through the Commonwealth Games might bring to the stadium. This is infrastructure we've already paid for. This is a spilt milk kind of conversation that's happening right now, or a sour grapes conversation that's happening on the past mistakes. I don't deny that there were lots of deficiencies. I don't deny that there was lots of sacrifices that were made. I think I would even go on the record today and be so bold, maybe not even popular, but I would side with Councillor Marula that if we could do it all over again and we had that money, would we spend it there when we have needs like housing and other social justice needs? Having said all of that, I also see on the internet, Mr. Deputy Mayor, infrastructure around the world from these types of games that have been built and then abandoned. You see it in Rio, you see it in other Olympic places that are maybe not in developed nations where you pay for the infrastructure once, you use it to great fanfare, and then it sits in disrepair. I hope that as a fiscally responsible councillor here in Ward 3, I hope that we stay open to the idea of using infrastructure our taxpayers have already paid for. I am certainly not on for general levy capital expenditures on new infrastructure to support this type of project. But I can tell you the Commonwealth Games are even bigger than the Pan Am Games, as I understand it, potentially here. And we have a field. We paid a mint for it. With its deficiencies and all, we have it here. And so if there is an opportunity for us to host soccer or any field-related sports in that stadium, I think it'd be irresponsible for us not to look at the highest and best use of that capital infrastructure. $160 million or whatever the running ticket is, the running tab on that, which is why I'm open to it. But I certainly understand the fervor around the table, the scars that might be fresh for some folks, having gone through the Pan Am Stadium debate. And I certainly understand some of the skepticism. I would also contend, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that the promised impacts, the financial impacts that we were promised during Pan Am, it seemed like the vast bulk of the majority of the impacts went to overtime for security and other things, when we couldn't even get people off the grounds to go one street over to Ottawa Street to be able to buy food. So we did all of these special events in and around the Pan Am precinct that was supposed to drive local economic development that didn't. And so now here's a chance for us, if we're at this bargaining table, to make some statements on conditional support for the feasibility. Doesn't mean we're going to get it. I completely understand the skepticism from my colleague to my right, that it's a slippery slope, that once you get past this hurdle, the next one comes, the next one comes, the next one comes. But I'll go on the record to say right now, I will not support general levy dollars for capital infrastructure, but I will support planning and programming around existing, Pan Am legacy facilities. So we have the stadium there. Let's not, to the other councillor's point, cut our nose to spite our face. Let's look at it and see what can we do at the lowest cost possible option, where we're not spending tens of millions of dollars on, capital infrastructure to float this thing, but that we use the existing facilities. To not do so, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I believe is irresponsible. To not do so when we already have built the stadium, when it's, say what you will about where it is. I'm proud to have it in Ward 3, but to not do so with that opportunity on the line, knowing that, we spend all this money on tourism and the hotel industry, and we just did $200,000 for them to go get, new events and big conventions. And here we are, where we could potentially have full capacity in our hotels and in our restaurants and in our service sector for weeks, because it's not just the athletes, it's the supporting crew as well. Then why wouldn't we look at it as an economic opportunity? So as a small business guy, I'm open to looking at the business model, but I fully respect where some of the other councillors were going. If the numbers don't make sense, we don't do it. But to not look at the numbers is a bit irresponsible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van der Beek.
Thank you. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'd like to say a couple things and ask a couple of questions. I just came back from Victoria, BC, and was there when they were going through their investigation and their request from the province and the feds to give them each of them $400 million. The 2014 Commonwealth Games apparently cost about $930 million. The province of BC has refused to pay $400 million for the Commonwealth Games. They're now struggling to see if they can't convince the provincial government that a group of private individuals will come forward and pay for any cost overruns. I'm not sure that's going to convince the provincial government, but that's what went on while I was in Victoria, BC. And so I understand and I agree with many of the things that were said by all of the previous speakers, but I also want to say that according to what I read, the schedule is this. Today we might agree what sounds like, what in some ways might sound like it's irresponsible not to investigate. We might agree to investigate. On the 20th of September is the next GIC meeting. On the 30th, the bid books have to be in. That's my understanding of the schedule. So I want to ask that question. My understanding is that on September 30th, the bid books have to be in. In October, they'll be reviewing them. In November, people will be invited to London, Ontario for presentations, to provide presentations on the Commonwealth Games. And in December, the decision will be made. And so I guess my question is, if we were to approve an investigation of this, knowing that the last games cost $930 million, and these games, according to what I read in the paper in Victoria, are estimated to cost about $955 million. And in 2 weeks, we would have to make that decision about whether or not that a bid book goes in on the 30th. I'm having real difficulty with
Councillor, do you want me to get clarification from staff
So
on that?
I would like to have staff respond to that, because
Can you just respond? When's the bid book due?
Yeah, through the chair, a lot of your facts are correct in terms of Victoria and their current status, but you're referencing the 2022 bid that Victoria is interested in. What we're speaking to in this report is 2030. Certainly we have time on our side, and to answer your question, no, those deadlines do not apply to us. We have a long time in terms of preparation.
How long do we have to say we're interested?
I'll be honest, we could wait and say we're interested at a later date. This gives us the opportunity to explore and investigate and provide a letter of interest.
So when would you get back to council if this resolution gets approved?
According to this report, we'd report back in the first quarter of next year.
Okay, Councillor Van der Beek.
Thank you. But before you go away, we're still looking at almost $100 million. Do you think that's correct?
It's difficult to even speculate at this time until we really explore what the total cost may be. The number you're referring to could be the number, but without doing our due diligence in terms of potential funding and costs, it's really, really difficult to determine. Victoria and their first phase of their bid, if you call it that, or proposal, had a municipal cost that was much less than that, but there have been games where the municipal contribution has been more. Generally, the ratio is 3-to-1 to government, or a return on investment of about 4-to-1 in terms of the municipal contribution.
But the overall cost is still about $100 million to the taxpayer.
The municipal taxpayer.
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we don't know that until we know whether the province and the feds are willing to come on board. And in Victoria, the provincial government was not willing to come on board. And so, you know, they were asking for 400 from the federal government, 400 from the provincial government, and then they would carry the rest and any cost overruns. So I'm glad that you, and I thank you for pointing out that this is not for the next games, it's for the following ones, because I was thinking along the lines of what I'd just been reading with great interest, knowing that we would be looking at that. So I just think $100 million is a lot of money. I mean, that's just a lot of money. And I'm not dead set against this recommendation to have it investigated, but even that costs money and time. And so I'm still going to listen to what else comes to the table here, but I don't know. You know, we have, not only do we have other priorities, the province has other priorities. And which has been exhibited in BC. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen in Ontario. I don't know. But the truth is that that's quite a chunk when we're looking at $1 billion for an LRT, and as the previous speaker to my left pointed out, various things that are going to cost this municipal taxpayer a lot of money. So thank you.
Thank you. We have next Councillor Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the previous speaker's comments and knowledge on the issue, and some of the questions that have been asked and comments that have been made are some of the things that I was mulling over when I first looked at this very brief report. In my understanding, just to add on to the previous correspondence, is Victoria is in a bit of a pinch because a city known as Durban, South Africa, the Commonwealth Games Federation axed their once successful bid because of what they concluded to be serious financial issues and what they felt was an inability to complete all the construction in a timely fashion. So they were awarded the 2022 games, and unfortunately they didn't look prepared enough, and so the Federation pulled out, and that's why there's a time crunch right now for those 2022 games. Through you to Greg. Greg, I know there's federal programs, provincial programs. Can you tell us here today whether or not any of those programs fit? Is there an opportunity to give us some clarity on what may be contributed by both the provincial and federal levels before we make the decision here today? Through you.
Without provincial or federal support, no municipality would go forward, nor would any bid or proposal be considered to host the games. In terms of current programs at the federal level under through Sport Canada, they do fund major games. We have not hosted in Canada the Commonwealth Games since 1994. But again, it's too premature without speaking to both senior level staff and probably both ministers of sport, both provincially and federally, to get any sense whatsoever whether or not there'd be interest at those levels.
So why couldn't we just sort of praise you down once before us today and just have you report back to us on what the province and the feds are willing to come up with before we go into anything too in depth? Through you, Chair. Is that a possibility?
I think that's why they're asking for permission to do just that.
provide information such as legacy opportunities, funding partners, and city responsibilities. There's more to, I'm reading more to the request with respect, Mr. Chair.
Greg,
So,
you want to respond to that?
That's correct.
so is it possible that we could get some clarity on what the federal and provincial governments would come to the table with before we start looking and investigating anything of any great significance? And to Councillor Vanderbeek's point, I mean, if we get a provincial government that's not willing to partner, then why go through the exercise of putting together graphs and charts and economic impact statements on how we may well fare during and following the games when it's irrelevant because we don't have that important piece, that important provincial partner, as a hypothetical example, through you, Chair.
Greg?
Through you, Chair, most definitely. Without the interest of the province or the federal government, again, it's a moot point. You could not go forward with a business plan that would ever even be considered to host the games, nor would it be responsible.
So just a quick comment. I would be more inclined and interested in supporting a very capable staffer in Greg Maychek to go have those conversations now with the feds and the province. Let's get some assurances that they would be on board to be a partner, and then move forward with all the rest of it. Through you, Chair. That's where my head's at this point.
Okay. Is that a question or a comment? That's a comment. Okay. So next we have Councillor Conley.
Thank you. Good discussion around here. I just see this as asking for information so we can make an intelligent decision. Right now, we can't make one. And the questions that were asked, is the province going to be involved? Is the feds going to be involved? How much going? That's all stuff that should be coming back to us that nobody can answer today and should not be answered. We do reports all the time to the province and to speed limits and to everything, and they're information things, and we either accept it or don't. Well, we just don't turn these information reports down just because it doesn't sound right. I think we can learn from our past mistakes, and I keep hearing all the negatives from Pan Am. I wasn't involved in the Pan Am very much, but we can learn from those mistakes and we won't do them again. We've spent a lot of money, or there has been a lot of money spent on the stadium that would be reused. We're not building another stadium for this. So that's money that we're not spending. The Thompson Arena swimming pool, I think, is Olympic size. That would be used for all the events in swimming. We already got it. We don't have to build another one. There's all money that we could possibly save. I'm not saying I'm for it, and I'm not saying I'm against it, but I will vote for the for doing a non-binding interest in the city of Hamilton for hosting it. It will be a lot more discussion than this council will have and next council will have. We're not binding ourselves to anything. We always talk about moving ahead and being a world-class city and doing the downtown and West Harbor, which I agree with everything that's said there. We want to be big, but we want to talk small. You know, so let's not make a decision today as far as turning it down. Give people a chance to investigate, to see what the ballpark figures are going to be. Nobody can tell you exact numbers for something that's happening 12 years from now. But let's give it a chance. And there's, what, 2 or 3 more councils that will be involved in this before it ever comes to fruition. So there's a lot of time to re-examine, to make changes, or even to bow out later. But please, let's give them a chance to do a report and get back to us. And if it's not economically feasible, I'll be the first one not to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. My apologies, I had to step away for a development review meeting, so I might have missed some of the information, but I'm going to go on the record that I too support expressing putting forward a non-binding interest. I think we need to get the information. I think it's important for us to sit around this table and say, no, we're just going to shut the door on it without even getting the opportunity of what's involved, costing, etc. would be very unfair to the taxpayers. I mean, I recall and I know it was mentioned somewhere, in 2003, we had the World Cycling event here in Hamilton, and it really did put Hamilton on the world stage. I remember that specifically. It was actually an election year. So, I mean, there was a lot of work that was done. I don't remember how many years back. I don't know how many years back that was even pursued, but it was a phenomenal event. I'd love to see that we could have it again. But, and I believe in 2003, we did put a bid in, and Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you to Greg, can you recall? I know it was just after the election. There was a bid. We were into the finals, if I'm not mistaken. Was that not for the Commonwealth Games that India got?
That's correct. We had bid for the 2010 Games and were unsuccessful.
But we were very, very close.
My opinion was, and others as well, that we had put together a tremendous bid, capable of hosting very successful games. But the games had never been in India. They had been in Canada previously three times, if you count the original British Empire Games in 1930. And the sense amongst the voters, certainly it was the turn of India being the largest nation of the Commonwealth with the largest population who had fulfilled their commitments through the bidding process. So, in my opinion, I think it was their turn.
Understood, and certainly can't disagree, but it was quite a process. And I believe through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and Greg, you can answer, would there not be a lot of background information that's already there that we can take like a template from that puts us that far ahead of what we can put forward through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
Tremendous work was done by staff and volunteers, and yes, that information we currently have, some of it might be a little dated, but much of it could be used and will certainly help us in determining costs for the next phase to report back to council.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that information. And again, as I say, I strongly believe that we at least have to get the information before us. To shut the door is very unfair to not just, well, just to the future residents and taxpayers in the city and opportunities. I mean, we know that the coming industry, and I'm reading our vision, is to provide diverse economic opportunities, and that's one of them. It's the service industry that allows a lot, the sports industry. And I believe if we have the opportunity, we have infrastructure that we've been improving on over the last number of years and we are very proud of. Sure, let's take the glitches that we've had out of the picture. You know what, there's going to be glitches on anything. But I think we should be very proud of what we have and where we've come in Hamilton with the stadium and other facilities. And I certainly would support moving forward, at least putting a non-binding opportunity of interest in on this. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And Councillor Conlon, can you take a chair for 1 second? That's the end of my first-time speakers. And Craig, what's the cost of putting this report together?
For this first phase, the plan is at no cost.
So you don't have to hire consultants to assist you put this together?
We'll do all we can internally for this first phase to come up with the cost estimates.
Do you have to hire consultants then?
I would say in this phase, no.
So you're saying other than your time and other staff time, there's no cost?
That's correct.
Okay. And, you know, I'd be the first one to say that I'm still Pan Am weary. You know, I chaired that stadium committee, and that wasn't a pleasant experience when we didn't have any control. And we did learn a lot from it. You know, make sure we control it in the future. But there's got to be an overwhelming, compelling argument why we do this. But I agree, I think we need more information. It's not going to cost us anything. I was concerned about some other members. But I also, Greg, don't candy coat this thing. You know, give it to us, the good and the bad and the ugly, so that we have a very clear understanding of exactly what we're stepping ourselves into. So we don't want a glowing report. We just want the straight goods if you can. If you can agree to do that, then I would be prepared to support this going the next step. It does concern me. Anybody that's hosted major sporting events got in glue. They've generally got in trouble because they didn't complete it on time, and they paid a fortune to accelerate the schedule to meet the deadline of the games coming. And of course, let's go back. I think Montreal's still paying for the Olympic Stadium, and that was decades and decades ago. And you see it in every major event. Unless somebody's driving the schedule and it always gets away from them, it becomes a real problem, and things get grossly expensive when you run out of time. So I'll support it moving ahead to the next step, but it better be real clear. And it's got to be an overwhelming, compelling argument, or I'm going to be opposed to it. So I'll take the chair back, Councillor Conley, and go to second-time speakers. And first is Councillor Marula.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And let me just clearly illustrate what we did go through. I know a lot has been talked about Ivor Wynne and where we were and where we're headed. The premise of my argument is that we have to govern based on needs and not wants. We inherited Ivor Wynne, granted, and really a private entity benefits from it the most, and that's the Hamilton Tiger Cats. So those of you that in the past that were seduced by the Cats and the ability to subsidize heavily their professional private enterprise did so, and they did it quite successfully to a point where they made you look like total fools. Not me, however, because I called it from day one in that we had $50 million in the future fund. That was our money. That money could have been utilized for the $3 billion, or at least mitigate some of the $3 billion in roads, sewers, sidewalks, $150 million in housing deficit. We have an aging population. We have priorities that are already in place. LRT is on the table. We haven't even finished that. We haven't even started that. We're not even quite sure we're going to get even to the start, to be honest. We have a lot of work to do, and we don't need any unwanted distractions. If some of you suffer from memory issues and not recognizing the process that manipulates and creates a scenario conducive to only divisiveness that the media benefits from, but the public doesn't, then I can't help you. But I know that even discussing it, let's reduce this down to a family. If you have a home and the house needs a new roof, a new electrical, new windows, a driveway, basement flooding, you don't go out and price Winnebagos a pool with a tiki bar. You focus in on what you need and not what maybe somebody wants, unless you're in a drunken stupor and you get into this discussion that doesn't mean anything. So unless some of you have had vodka for breakfast, I'm not sure why we're even remotely considering buying a Winnebago with a pool and a tiki bar when we need $3 billion in roads, sewers, sidewalks, $150 million in housing. And you guys are talking about tiki bars and pools. Listen, folks, I don't know if I need to go back in history and take the archives, but Pan Am, I want those reports to be, and I hope the media is listening, pull them all out. Look at the promises that were made regarding why council should have supported it. None of it came to fruition. Not one major network aired the damn games. Not one. Hamilton wasn't mentioned once. I tried to Google it during the games, couldn't find anything. Hamilton and Pan Am, anything related to Hamilton. And we were on display for the world. Man, it was the most unfocused priority. I think I called it the mother of most unfocused priorities. But it ended up making us look like the Bush League, literally. And the fact that we still haven't even finished the stadium, and that's still going on, and now we're talking about a major project that is based on wants, not needs, is really a reflection of not responsibility, but competence. It is incompetent to pursue something like a Winnebago pool with a tiki bar when you need a roof, electrical, windows, and driveway, and your house and the foundation of your house. So, folks, look at this from what we need and not what some of you want, because what we need is what the people of the city need. Anything short of that is incompetent and irresponsible.
Okay, Councillor Scully's next.
Thank you, and through the Deputy Chair, just a short story I wanted to share. I was a reporter at CHCH during the 2010 games, and Greg is right, we were this close to getting the Commonwealth Games. And remember, CHCH had picked up the feed. We had to buy satellite time at that point. It was quite expensive, and they were going to be announcing the games from their location in Jamaica. So we had purchased satellite time, and we were broadcasting it to Hamilton. We had all of the networks in Canada that were picking up our feed, and we also had hundreds, if not thousands, of people packed into then Cops Coliseum waiting on the announcement. Well, as you can imagine, as I said, satellite time was quite expensive, and CHCH at the time was quite frugal. So they booked it in 15-minute increments, and we're waiting, and we're going to get this game, we're going to get this game, and the winner is, we lost our feed. Nobody knew who got the games because we didn't buy enough time. So we lost our feed right at the time that they announced who was going to win. The only person who carried it was CHCH Live. Everybody at the stadium was waiting, who won? Who won? They had to call back to the station to find out who actually won, and we found out we lost. So just a little anecdote on that one. I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Ferguson's comments. We have to get a report that includes everything, including what Councillor Vanderbeek was saying, because I think it's important that if we're going to go down this road, we have to know, is there any chance that it's going to cover its costs? Forget about making money that's not going to make money, but is there any chance that we're actually going to recoup? And when we talk about, as Councillor Whitehead said, tapping into other levels of government for funding, it's still taxpayer dollars. I mean, it's still coming out of the taxpayer's pocket, whether it's the right or the left, it's still taxpayer funded. So let's get a report back that tells us the truth about what we can expect, the timelines and the cost. And if it is too onerous, then let's just pull the plug on it and not move down, not get to a point where there a point of no return. Let's find out what we're getting into, warts and all, and then make a decision then. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Yep, thank you very much. Before I begin, I just wanted to acknowledge Greg Megchek and also Mark Wu, who's up at the top there. Great article on you this morning, Mark. Renowned volleyball coach. I also want to, and I wasn't going to chime in because I had my mind made up from the get-go. When you Google the Commonwealth Games, there are 35 events. Not just a stadium event, not just pool event. There are 35 events. So it's not going to be just in Hamilton. It's going to be farmed out all over the place because there's rowing, there's sailing. There's all kinds of events that come along with us. Now, having said that, and it sounds just wonderful, I'm sitting here trying to figure out where to find $400,000 to create 2 sections of sidewalks to connect my neighborhoods to a major commercial development because we have no development charges to cover it. So I get what Councillor Marula is saying. It's the want versus the need. And right now I'm going to be very, very parochial. I need a lot of stuff in Ward 11 to make it what it should be and what the taxpayers have been paying for and not getting. So with all due respect, folks, I'm not interested, and with all due respect to Mark and Greg, and your sports enthusiasm is beyond. I simply cannot face my taxpayers tomorrow and say, yeah, we might go after the games and we don't know how much it's going to cost. Yeah, the report might say it one way or the other. But right now, I have needs that I need to take care of, and they're basic needs. I'm not asking for a gymnasium. I'm not asking for, a fountain in a park. I'm asking for parks to be completed. So with all due respect, folks, that's my vote. I'm simply not supportive at this time.
Thank you. Go back now to second-time speakers, and Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. Second time? No, Councillor. Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and certainly hearing what Councillor Vanderbeek unpacked in terms of this $100 million cost just to bid, for me, is a deal breaker. I thought I would explore, what it might look like to host soccer in our stadium pre-existing without additional costs. But if we're talking about $100 million, I don't care if it's $100 million today or $100 million 15 years from now. I don't believe, I'll side with Marula on this one actually, and kind of flip the script. I'm not on for that even now. So we know that to be a fact now. We're looking at $100 million these terms. We know that 15 years from now, it's going to be whatever. It could be 300 or 400 million. The total project will go from $1 billion project to a $2 billion project. So I can't support even exploring it if it's going to mean that the municipality is on for a $100 million price tag at the end of the day, even if it's 15 years from now.
Craig, you have a comment on that?
The reference for clarification, in terms of the bidding, the cost is quite small, but in terms of hosting, I'll be honest, the cost could be that high, could even be a little higher.
Sorry, I did understand that. I misspoke. I understand that the first phase, but we know in the second phase, as the Deputy Mayor has stated, is going to require consultants. We'll be in the tens of millions, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and kind of getting this even off the ground before we even begin. And we just know that to be true. So For that reason, I'm happy to reiterate our focus on things like housing and our core needs. So I'm out. Like the Dragon's Den, I'm out.
Okay. Last speaker is Councillor Whitehead.
Chair, in fact, I do have the Ira Wynn study that was done prior to building a new stadium, and it gives you all the costs that would have cost the residential tax for this community in respect to bringing it up to standard. The issue, Mr. Chair, is that anything that anyone has indicated isn't wrong. Yes, we have priorities. But also being leaders is about finding opportunities to leverage dollars to this community that can meet some of those things that we couldn't otherwise afford. When you can build 20,000 units of affordable housing through a Commonwealth Games potential and leverage federal and provincial funds to offset that, you have just leaped yourself forward on a housing issue and challenge in this community. If you can tap into infrastructure dollars to the federal and provincial government to build SkyTrains in Toronto, in Vancouver, certainly if there's transit needs to meet probably one of the largest games outside the Olympics in our community, then you could advance the transportation needs to many parts of this community. We get to explore the opportunity. We can still make an informed decision. We can also get to frame what our needs are and how we can carve those needs into the proposal to, again, advance the taxpayers in this community in regards to moving those yardsticks to improve the conditions and quality of life, transportation, and housing in our community. If it can't be used as a vehicle, then we can say no. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Partridge is now the last speaker.
Yes, thank you. And just very, very quickly, and I'm going to follow up on one of the previous speakers. You know, when it comes down to needs in our community, and Waterdown and Binbrook have been inundated with explosive growth. And in my community alone, I have 7,500 homes that are going to be built. We've got about 1,200 being built right now. We have no new infrastructure. And I've got about $70 million we've got to find it to build the bypass that we need desperately within the next 2 to 3 years. And you know, that's not a wish list. And I know that my community, when they're looking for leadership, they're looking for leadership that is going to get them what they need to have a better quality of life. And the city of Hamilton as a whole benefits from the DC charges and from the taxes that are going to come from those new homes. And they are on a very accelerated pace to build those homes. And yet we don't have the money to build the infrastructure that we need. And it is a crisis up there. So please think about that. That's just Waterdown. But we have several areas across this city that have millions and millions and millions of dollars in critical need. And we must pay attention to that. Thank you.
Okay, I have no more speakers, so there's a recommendation before us. Would someone like to move the motion so we can get it a vote? Moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Pearson. Standing recorded vote. All those in favor of the motion. How many call them out? So Councillor Connolly, Councillor Pearson, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Whitehead, Councillor Scully, Councillor Farr. And those opposed? Councillor, I'll start over here. Councillor Johnson, Brenda Johnson, Councillor Vanderbeek, Councillor, what's your name? Partridge, isn't it? Yeah. Councillor Collins, Councillor Marula, Councillor Green, and Councillor Aidan Johnson. I didn't count them, Madam Clerk, so you have to give us the results.
That was defeated, 7-6.
I'm sorry, say it louder.
Defeated, 7-6.
Okay. So the motion is defeated. Let's move on to 8.3. And the report is before you. Any questions or comments? Before we go to a motion, I just want to make sure nobody has any comments. Seeing none, I'm going to just relinquish the chair to Councillor Connolly for 1 second. And I guess I'll direct my questions to Hazel. You seem to be the person on the report, Hazel. And I've raised this before, and I'm going to keep asking it. We've exempted the development charges. This is I'm looking on page 15, the last report. We exempted development charges for the downtown area to regenerate the urban center, the old core. And it's on a boom. And I don't see you illustrating what it cost us to waive the DCs since we put that program in place. You've got costing for everything else except the waiving of the DCs. Do you know that number?
Through the chair, yes. I didn't include it in my report because it was reported previously through the Finance Committee, or through, shall I say, Finance
Can you get
Department.
right up to the microphone because you don't have a loud voice?
Sorry. I did not include the number in my report. However, it was in a report that was previously considered by City Council earlier in the year, prepared by Finance. So from 2012 to 2016, in the downtown only, it was $20,782,238 in total.
So $20 million.
Yes.
And it's reducing by 5% per year right now?
That's correct. So right now it's 75% exempt. As of July 2018, it will be 70%. And then Finance are coming forward with a review of the DC bylaw. Actually, they will be coming later this year, I believe in October, November, with options for DCs for consideration by City Council. And then the DC bylaw will be reviewed in 2019.
Okay, and on the first item, it was the Hamilton Downtown Property Investment Program, which was originally developed as a catalyst for stimulating residential development in downtown Hamilton.
Yes.
And I see that we've already advanced $35 million on that, too.
That's correct. And the only, but that's all been paid back. So right now, the only outstanding amount is approximately $9 million. And we've got approximately right now $90 million for future loan agreements. So the money is paid back. We advanced it, but it's paid back. We did have one default, and that was in 2008.
That was the loss of the $1 million.
That's correct.
Didn't pay us back. Okay, because other areas don't have this. And I guess my only point is downtown is probably the area that's booming the most in the city right now. And do we still need these? Do we still need to give exemptions from development charges? Because they're sure being charged in Councillor Partridge's ward and certainly Councillor Johnson's ward and Councillor Conley's ward, but we're exempting the downtown, yet I see all these cranes out there. And then we're also offering this residential, the property investment program, which was developed as a catalyst to stimulating residential development. And we've seen there. When do we sunset these, in your professional opinion, Hazel?
Urban Renewal would not recommend that we do not exempt the DCs right now because developers put their pro formas together between 3 and 4 years before they actually start construction. So to pull the development charge exempt from right now would have a negative impact on downtown. We would recommend you make that decision when you look at the 2019 DC bylaw.
That's for DCs.
For DCs. With respect.
But what about the downtown is, Hamilton Downtown Investment Program? We're offering these.
Absolutely. Through the chair, so when we are transitioning out of the downtown. When we came forward with our amendment of our CIPs and the review of the financial incentives last year, we had extensive public input. We also have a pro forma analysis undertaken by a consultant to determine whether or not the financial incentives are still required. They were. When you look at the surface parking lots within the downtown, you superimpose that over the downtown Hamilton Community Improvement Project area. There's a number of them. We'd like to see those developed as per the downtown secondary plan. We are transitioning out. It used to be no limit or no maximum on the loan. We then brought it down to $5 million loan per project. Now we're bringing it down to $4 million per project. We have also extended this project to Barton and Kenilworth because they're challenged as well. So that program isn't solely just for downtown. It is for Barton and Kenilworth as well.
Okay, because the rest of the municipality is subsidizing these things. And, I don't think anybody would disagree that our downtown is on a renaissance. I don't think you can argue with all the cranes you see turning out there now. And is that because of these incentive programs? Or is it because of the LRT? Is it because of the GO Transit? Is it because of the Green Belt where you got to expand, you can't expand out anymore, you got to expand up? Is it because of the model projects that we've invested in downtown, like City Hall renovations, the Lister Block, and of course, we put $20 million into the new Medical Center, and on and on. Well, does this development charge exemption and the Hamilton Downtown Investment Program, does that flow over to the Piers 7 and 8, the rear development? Are they going to be exempt from development charges also?
Through the chair, no. Our boundary goes to the CN tracks northerly, so it doesn't include Pier Forest, it doesn't include the waterfront.
Okay.
Period.
So let me go back to DC's because I see Mike just come back in the room. I remember, Mike, you telling us that we can't fiddle with the development charge exemption more than the 5% per year until you do another development charge review. Have I got that right? Or can we just stop it through a resolution today?
So through the chair, amending the policy would require amending the bylaw. Amending the bylaw would require some public consultation. And so that would involve a considerable period of time. And given that we have to, Council will have to consider this issue in July of 2019. Again, it's going to be before this Council in July of 2019. So the question would be the value of accelerating it, for instance, by 6 months.
Okay, because I hear Hazel say, what was the number, $100 million is what we've exempted so far in development charges for downtown renewal. Was that the correct number, Hazel?
Through the chair, it was $20 million, $782 and $238. So about $20 million.
$100 million? $20 million. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you today. So that's money that we've passed on that could have been used for roads and sidewalks, and, but not for coffee shops or swimming pools, but to use for other infrastructure throughout the city. So I have a lot of discomfort with these grants in the downtown area when downtown is booming now. And we saw that when we had to do a property purchase recently, and the cost per acre of downtown property has gone up probably 300 times since in the last 6 years. So I'm curious to know how other councillors feel about this issue and whether it's time to accelerate the shutdown of the relief of development charges in the downtown area, since it seems to be doing fine now and doesn't need this investment from the rest of the city in order to make this go. So I'll relinquish the chair with that, Councillor Conley. Do you have any speakers?
Yeah, I have Councillor Farr and Councillor Johnson.
Brenda Johnson.
So thank you, and thank you offline and in committee. I've always appreciated your comments over the years, and more recently, I think Councillor Marula was the catalyst to my moving the motion to bring this forward today, and then ultimately through you to Hazel, Mr. Deputy Mayor. There's another report coming. I think it's in, is it 2019? Did you say, or next year? 2019. And
Our report?
What that report would entail, please.
So we're bringing forward another report in 2018 before the capital and operating budget deliberations, and that will be the culmination of a review of all of our financial incentives and the recommendations at that time as to whether or not we transition out of the downtown and all the other community downtowns and business improvement areas, because a lot of our programs are offered throughout the city, not just within the downtown.
Well, very good point. And I think the focus for my good friend and colleague is the DC reduction. So just to that, and I mean, obviously this is a great report, and throughout the city and in the downtown, when we see ratios of grants to construction value just for the LEAD program, for every buck we spend, $36 in construction value. The downtown Hamilton West Harbourfront remediation loan program, for every buck, $106 in construction value. The erase program, for every buck, $27. It goes on. And so quite obviously the incentives are by design a creature of investment in our city, and they are obviously working and they are effective. But to the DC specifically, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to Mike Zagarek, it was through motion initially that we agreed upon the 5% annual reduction. When was that? And is that right, through motion, through you?
So through the chair, it was a decision of council with the last DC bylaw. So through the consultation with the stakeholders and the advisory committee, the recommendation was to begin phasing out the CEPA DC exemption, and again, so it was through that development charge review process, through the collection of information, through the development charge background study, and ultimately through consultation through the stakeholders group, and then at council that decision was made. And to Councillor Ferguson's previous question, council will have to go through that process again in 2019, leading up to the expiry of our current development charge bylaw, which will expire in July of 2019. So during in 2018-19, staff will be starting to compile all the information as it relates to our DC background study, and all of the bylaws, all of the policy issues contained in that bylaw, not just the downtown DC exemption, but our industrial reduced DCs, our DC exemptions for institutional, including education and healthcare, our exemptions for agriculture, all of those issues will be before committee again as part of that DC bylaw process.
Okay, and thank you. And I think we're required by a provincial mandate to do those reviews. Through you, Chair, back to Mike. Joe Speiler, specific to the development charges, his review is this coming October or November on DCs, and that also as a result of a request by council. Is that correct? I know he's been working on it for some years because there's been very good questions with respect to development charge exemptions.
So through the chair, I've been, Brian's just informed me that staff are preparing an information report as to the status of DC exemptions and requests for 2017. So just an information report.
It's an information report, okay. And I agree. I mean, you'd have to be blind to not see there's an incredible rejuvenation happening in the core. I don't take any full credit for it. I facilitate where applicable. I seem to do that quite a bit as it relates to developments and try to engage with the public. And it's a popular place to be, and it's a popular place to build. And I would only suggest that councils, even before my time, quite obviously made the right decisions in providing incentives such as full, at the time, development charge exemptions and those sorts of programs. SEPA and the footprint of the community improvement plan area was well devised. It focused on areas that needed rejuvenation, and we are seeing that rejuvenation. There is no doubt. When I meet with Urban Renewal, in the last meeting I had with Hazel and Judy Lamb from Urban Renewal, conversations I've had in the past with our now Director of Economic Development, who's probably here now, no, not today, focus on, finding that balance and the need. And so through you, Chair, finally, to Hazel, you mentioned briefly to the good questions before about a consultant's report. When was the consultant's report? I know it was roughly around the time that we also engaged publicly and asked these good questions. And in a nutshell, I know it's here, but if you could get on the public record, the findings and why that consultant can advise that now is not the time just yet to completely eliminate some of these programs. Through you, Chair, to summarize, please, my rambling, Hazel.
Through the chair, so the consultant was hired in 2016 as part of our review of all our financial incentives, and they undertook a pro forma analysis. We hired him again, and we will continue to hire him to update whether or not there is a requirement for financial incentives. So he updated in 2017, as of July, actually, of this year. The conclusion was the financial incentives are still required because our boundary is not finite, and when they look at their return of investment, because the financial incentives offset some of their risk, if we didn't offer them, they could easily go to another municipality. So it's how do we stay competitive?
So it really comes down to, in business terms, an ROI and trying to continue to encourage the investment in a market that, unfortunately, despite the cranes and despite the rejuvenation we're seeing, quite obviously, an expert in the field sees a need to continue to try to continue to lure that investment that in turn, quite obviously, on an annualized basis, forevermore brings taxes to our coffers that we otherwise had not have seen. notwithstanding the fact during developments, as you well know, and others, brings hundreds of jobs and feeds our economy during the times of massive constructions. In a lot of cases, for example, Rancor and the 5 phases, we're on the 5th and final phase from a developer who stated if it weren't for the incentives, I wouldn't be doing it. Same with Spalachi at the other end of our downtown core. If it weren't for the incentives, they probably wouldn't be making a 5-phase investment. They're on phase 2 right now. So we are seeing successes, and we are rightly, I will summarize everything, Mr. Chair, we are rightly examining, re-examining, and continuing to focus on where we need to continue to make those incentives and in turn create better socioeconomic outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Yep, thank you, and I appreciate the comments from the 2 previous speakers. Initially, when this SEPA came forward, I did have some concerns with it because I felt that it was limiting it just to the downtown, that we had several downtowns in the city of Hamilton. Having said that, seeing the 6 cranes going up and seeing everything revitalized, I think the job has been merited. I think that it has done a great job in inciting development downtown. But unfortunately, the negative side to this is our DC pile, our DC savings account has decreased considerably because we don't have the DCs coming in from all over the city. So whenever I go to the staff and ask for something related to development, I'm often told that there's no funds left there. There's no funds in there to accommodate new development. So there is a flip side to this. I'm very anxious to see what happens if I'm still here in 2019. I think, as I said before, I think it's been a good program. I think it could be maybe limited in the mapping, if you will, like create maybe a donut. The center now doesn't get the exemptions, but expanding it to Wentworth Street in particular and Wellington Street. But also there's other downtowns in the city of Hamilton. But again, when we exempt something, that means nothing's coming in, and when nothing is coming in, or very little is coming in, then what we need to achieve when we are developing new developments, subdivisions and commercial and industrial parks, we need to have those funds to create that balance. And right now, it sounds like there isn't one. So Tony Sergi actually has been asked by me to put together a report of how the DCs are doing. So when we do review the bylaw in 2019, we can have a holistic look at it, at what the effect it's had on the DC's savings account, if you will. So those are my comments right now. I'm looking forward to both the report in 2018 and if I'm here 2019. But I do have to say, though, that there are areas that are suffering because there has been DC exceptions somewhere else. So I think we need to find that really good balance so everyone benefits. Thank you.
Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael, I have raised the Lumpco issue in respect to places to grow, infrastructure projections, investment, and the fact that municipalities currently are not receiving enough development charges to pay for that infrastructure investment, and therefore it's falling on the backs of taxpayers. I believe York did the study. Is that correct?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, with respect to development charges, this council has taken the position through a consultation process that the province led in reviewing the Development Charge Act that growth should pay for growth. Having said that, there is currently legislative regulatory requirements that municipalities in effect subsidize growth-related projects, and I'll refer to it as service standards. So there is a common discount provided to a number of services through the Development Charge Act, as well as discretionary exemptions. And so in the case of the City of Hamilton, we have a number of discretionary DC exemptions, including CEPA, as well as some commercial, industrial, and agricultural exemptions. So specific to the councillor's question with respect to does growth pay for growth, it does not. It does not because of provincial legislation that restricts municipalities to recoup the full cost, as well as local decisions to provide a number of exemptions.
Yeah, but I think what the point I'm making, and I think the previous speaker made it very clearly, that what we have banked in development charges is not meeting some of the basic needs in certain areas of the city. And the reason for it is because we're not bringing in the development charges at the level we should. And there's other reasons for that, which York has identified through the Lumpco report. So now we're manifesting the lack of development charges to fill that bank to meet our growth-related, within the bylaw, growth-related projects, because we're not generating the revenue, and we further exaggerate that with the fact that we waived development charges in certain areas of the city. So I like to see a total impact to the city in regards to what projects are being frozen out or delayed, the times of the delay, as a result of the lack of development charges being available to fund those particular projects in a timely fashion. Just like when you go to the doctors and you want to go hip replacement, you know, there's a target for it, and all of a sudden it's 2 years, 3 years. I'd like to know in the city of Hamilton, what is our time frame for some basic growth-related projects within needed areas when the development charges aren't available?
Yeah, so through the chair, we can work with planning and economic development. We do have a number of DC reserves that frankly have a negative balance, in that the principally because of exemptions, where we are exempting and recognizing the fact that legislatively, where you exempt, you must mitigate that through passing that burden on to existing taxpayers, ratepayers. In the case of the city of Hamilton, we currently collect approximately, I believe it's about $9 million through the rate budget and the tax supported capital budget to fund those exemptions. That's far short of what the current value of exemptions are on average annually, and consequently that leads to the staging of development report that Tony leads, whereby city staff are required to prioritize growth-related projects to align to our funding capacity. So again, if it weren't for some of our challenges with respect to our development charge reserves, we could be moving forward on more growth-related projects than we currently are.
Appreciate that. Development charges, can you highlight what development charges currently under our Act can contribute to?
Sorry, through the deputy mayor, I'm not sure I understood the question.
So
Is it what
we have a
services?
development charge committee, and the province has framed what dollars, where the dollars from development charges could be applied. So in the city of Hamilton, can you just give us a high level of all the different areas that development charges dollars could be afforded to?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, in terms of development charges, they're applied to the growth-related portion of a project. So often projects might have a shared benefit towards future growth as well as existing residents. So the initial step of identifying any project is identifying the portion of the project that's related to future growth, and you portion the cost accordingly. There's a number of services that DCs, it may be simpler to identify the services that DCs can't be applied to. I believe it is any fleet with a useful life of less than 6 years, and I might be wrong, it might be 6 or 7 years. So for instance, a paramedic or ambulance unit will likely have a useful life less than what could be covered in part through development charges. Administrative buildings cannot be funded through development charges. It's not an eligible cost, so it can't be captured in that background study I made reference to previously.
Maybe I could shorten it through the chair. Parks can be covered to some degree through that, can it not?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, there is a parkland dedication fee that in part covers the growth-related portion of the cost. The one change that was brought about through the last consultation process is transit now is deemed an eligible service. So currently it is not captured in our DCs because our last DC update was 2014. That change came into effect in 2016. And the other is waste collection and waste collection and disposal. And so those two service areas will be captured in our next update, which will be in 2019.
I appreciate it. I think the reason I'm raising it, I mean, for example, Upper James doesn't have development freeze. I mean, 99% of this community does not have development freezes except for downtown, and yet downtown is doing very well. We've got a $1 billion project with transit that's going to only encourage more, and yet we have somebody saying there's still risk. There's still risk. So does that mean the risk building downtown today is higher than the risk that developers are building on the mountain? And if so, what are those risks?
Jason?
Yeah, so through the chair, I can try to answer the question. So the work the consultant did was looking at what is the, how much risk we're carrying, developers carrying in the downtown, and that partially speaks to them what sort of incentives you need to have in place to mitigate those risks. I think if you look at where intensification is happening right now in the city, what we're seeing is, yes, it certainly, as was said earlier, it's booming in the downtown compared to what it was historically. If you go back 7-8 years, I mentioned this at Planning Committee yesterday, I could probably count on one hand the number of residential units we were building in the core. Now we're typically in the 300 unit per year range, give or take. So that's certainly significantly higher than it was, but it's underperforming compared to what we have planned that intensification in the downtown to be. Where we are overperforming in intensification in the city is actually in some of the surrounding neighborhoods. So where we're seeing higher intensification rates than what we had included in our forecast and our plans is in Ancaster, is in Stony Creek, is on the mountain, in some of those other neighborhoods where we had planned for approximately 40% of our intensification, but what we're actually seeing is about 70% of our intensifications being carried in those areas. So as I said, the downtown is booming compared to where it has been historically, but it's not performing up to where it has been planned to be in our official plan.
So again, the question I asked, because, I think somebody said earlier in another debate, do the same thing over and over again. If you hire the same consultant over and over again, you're going to get the same perspective. Maybe it's time to hire another consultant. My issue is, when you say there's risk currently investing downtown at a higher rate than the risk anywhere else in the city, and yet you don't identify what that risk is, then it seems somewhat hollow and a straw man argument. So help me understand what the risk is that is so high now that we need to continue justifying development charge holidays in certain areas of the city, in certain geographic areas of the downtown, relative to those same developers that are developing elsewhere on the mountain, or in Ancaster, or in Bimbrook, or in Stony Creek, or in the East End.
So through the chair, I can't give you a neighborhood by neighborhood breakdown. I can tell you what we've looked at in what's been observed in the downtown is that it's about 35% of project costs. And Hazel or Judy might be able to speak to sort of the specifics out of the report. And compared to what the consultant said is sort of in comparable jurisdictions in surrounding municipalities and in stronger performing markets where they're carrying about 20% of project costs. So I don't know if Judy wants to expand on that. Judy?
Yes, so the pro formas were performed in 3 areas, one in the Durand neighborhood, one in the downtown, and one on Barton. And what was discovered that based on the vacancy rates, the perceptions of cleanliness and safety, let's say in the downtown versus Barton versus Durand, what the consultant found. And the reason why we asked him was, okay, since 2015, there's been new projects that perhaps incentives are no longer needed. So he did base it on what was happening in 2015, 2016, and then again today with all the new projects. And what the conclusion was in the Durand neighborhood, because it's fairly dense neighborhood, very little opportunity for redevelopment because there's no surface, empty surface parking lots, that incentives were not required in the Durand neighborhood. In downtown, and taking into consideration that we have the density targets, that we're at 189, we're not yet close to the density targets as set by the growth plan, that downtown, it becomes marginal without the incentives. And actually in Barton, it was determined that with all the incentives and with our new incentives, it is not, the pro forma doesn't make sense with all the incentives as well. So that's the three areas, and probably it's because of the places to grow plan that we concentrate on where the multi-residential can be developed.
So the challenge I'm having, Mr. Chair, is risks are based on market, and market is driven by who and where they want to live and buy. So I'm not clear in anything that I've just heard now that would suggest, certainly based on what is actually being built and people are moving in, that the market isn't there. So if the market is there, then what is the risk?
I think part of it is the absorption rates. The buildings have been in construction, and until the developers have known, I guess, quantities in terms of how fast will these units sell, how fast can they get their profit back before they can get out of the market. So given that it is a fluid GTHA market, that if they have less risk going elsewhere, and at the moment, that's what they looked at in terms of how fast they can sell the units, how much they need to acquire the land and the development charges and all the other incentives, that's what they took into consideration, whether they would reach their required rate of return to invest in Hamilton.
So be clear, I'm not talking about CPA or all those other different programs. I'm specifically focusing on development charges. So my whole conversation, I understand the merit, and those programs actually exist in a much broader area. So I'm really only focusing on development charges. And you're saying the consultant has come back and indicated you still need, even though the market seems to be hot in regards to people buying, even though we're making $1 billion investment in LRT in the lower city, that these developers still need a hand up in regards to incentive to build.
Yes, what he did was for each of the three areas, he looked at what incentives are applied. So in the downtown, that's the only one where the other areas didn't have that development charge reduction. So he did apply it as a bulk incentive number and looked at what impact it had on the rate of return. And his conclusion was that because developers did plan 3 to 4 years out, and it is a fluid market, that yes, that taken into consideration was still required. He's saying that it's a good decision to wind it down, transition out by 5% a year. If you do it by a greater percentage or cut it completely, that there could mean that the risk would be they would move their projects elsewhere.
Could, okay. And I guess the flip side of this discussion is, I just saw a report, and I actually met with the city manager on it, that talked about a lot of the, where some of these development charges are and where these buildings are being built and they get the free subsidy. They're the areas that got highest deficiency, let's get this right now, highest deficiency in parkland. Now, if you're not generating development charges to go to that bank to deal with our infrastructure needs, growth related, then aren't we exasperating the problem in regards to growth-related needs in the downtown when we waive development charges?
So through the chair, if you're talking about sort of parkland dedication, we do have parkland dedication rates that apply in the downtown core. They are reduced. That is one of the issues that we were directed by Planning Committee to take a look at, and we are consulting with the development industry right now in terms of what those parkland dedication rates should be for higher density forms of development and in the downtown core. But if the question is around that there are servicing needs to support a growing downtown population, yes, that's absolutely correct. And if you look at other municipalities as well, parkland tends to be one of the ones that is a particular challenge in delivering in a fast-growing, urbanizing downtown core.
So the rub, Mr. Chair, and this is the reason why I'm sort of profiling this, is when I see a report that comes forward, knowing that on the mountain they're paying full park fees, they're paying full development fees, and yet the bank is almost dry to build a park. And then when you justify a park, they say, well, there's greater deficiency in the lower city. But the counter to that is they're not generating money to offset that problem in the lower city, but they are in the mountain, but we don't have the money to do it. The whole city feels the pinch, and yet it's not applied equitably, and it's not applied equitably in the reports. Because in the mountain, they are generating the revenue for it. They are paying the full park dedication, and yet we'll get a report saying, well, we got bigger problems downtown. Well, help me understand how you square the ends on this.
Councillor, can I suggest that maybe the right thing to do would be for you to place a resolution in that staff report back on accelerated reduction in development charges in the lower city?
I'll certainly
It seems to be your, and I share your concern, quite frankly, but it seems to be your concern. Would that be a more appropriate action?
Well, certainly it's something we should consider. I'll work with staff before council. I won't do anything now. But I think I was really frustrated to understand where the revenue is being generated and where the offsets are, and yet where the offsets are is an argument used against other areas in need who are generating the dollars. And to me, that's dividing a city.
Yeah, we get that.
So we need to fix
the appropriate thing
process.
to do is test the will of council just to accelerate the reduction of DCs, which is the bone of contention here.
Yeah. I'll work with staff and bring something forward to council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Sorry, I thought I heard from staff yesterday, and I think Hazel reiterated it today, that a report is coming back prior to the capital budget process. And I thought I heard Mike say today that the DC bylaw is and will be under review in 218. So I was hoping to receive today's report, and many of the comments and the desire to make changes, I think, could occur at a later date. So at the appropriate time, I'd move to receive 8.3.
Okay, I think Councillor Farr's ahead of you, but I'll let you second it if you like. We now have Councillor Conley.
Thank you. Just clarification in my own head. When we do a reduction of DCs, in any way does that affect the levy for the taxpayers? Are they paying more because of the reductions in the DCs? And
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the short answer is yes. And so under the Development Charge Act, where there are exemptions, either legislative or discretionary, and the City of Hamilton has a number of development charge exemptions that are discretionary. They are locally determined, decided exemptions, whether it's CEPA, whether it's our healthcare partners who are exempt 50%, our education partners who are exempt, our number of our agricultural stakeholders are exempt. Under the Act is that that foregone revenue must be made up through existing taxpayers. So currently, we levy $3 million through our tax-supported capital budget to help fund those exemptions, and $7.6 million on our rate-supported, for a total of about $10.6 million. 2016. So $10.6 million of that cost is borne by existing ratepayers and taxpayers.
So on one hand, we're giving away DCs to help somebody build. On the other hand, we're charging the taxpayers. But the extra charges that we're charging the taxpayers don't benefit the community necessarily that they're in. So we charge more taxes because we're giving exceptions away, but we're not getting anything for them. All I hear when I talk about getting and I don't know, Councillor Johnson suggested, getting a sidewalk in, you might as well be asking for the Taj Mahal because, oh, there's no money in it. There's no money in the DCs for it. And then I find out we're paying for that through our taxes, but that money that we're paying to make up for the development charges doesn't apply to the people that are paying for it. It just, it's being used someplace else, I guess. And I really find it hard to accept those premises that can't get much done because even though we're paying for somebody else to get a DC reduction, we're paying for it, so there should be no cost, no extra. We're not benefiting from it as a community, and I just don't understand that philosophy.
So the right thing to do is the same advice I give to Councillor Whitehead is to, and there's some of us that agree with you that somebody's got to make a motion, test it with council to have staff report back on how we accelerate the reduction of the development charge exemption to the downtown area. Because none of us are saying the same thing over and over again. We just need to get a decision on it if that's what council wants to do.
So through the Deputy Mayor, just to Councillor Conley's question or comment is, is a number of the discretionary DC exemptions were intended for broader benefits. So whether it's our industrial or commercial, in an effort to create some employment lands, employment opportunities, that was the rationale with respect to some of those exemptions. With respect to, Jason made reference to the province's intensification goals and objectives towards a more sustainable form of development. The intended purpose was a broader public benefit, and it was to try to incent that form of development, again, intended to be more sustainable. We have a number, so I started to reference, so it's whether they're academic exemptions, healthcare exemptions, again, those are intended for the broader public benefit. And so again, those will all be before committee, council in 2019 as part of our background study, as will the CEPA. So again, when we bring forward the bylaw, it's not targeting any particular policy, it is the broader suite of exemptions and policies that will be before council.
When's this report coming in, sorry? This fall?
So through the chair, exclusive of the potential motion is development charge bylaws must be updated every 5 years. Our last bylaw was July of 2014. Therefore, it has to be before council by July of 2019. But when I made reference of 2018-19 staff, in fact, are already working towards the work that will support that bylaw. So staff are already developing the contents to the background study. That will continue in 2018, and that will lead to striking of an advisory committee and steering committee, and the bylaw will be before council, must be before council before July of 2019.
Just one last question. When DCs are collected from a certain area, oh, I'm sorry. When DCs are collected from a certain area, do those DC money have to be spent in that area?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, no. With respect to DCs, if you were to break down, we have a number of charges that make up the DC, whether it's outdoor recreation, indoor recreation, roads, bridges. So the DC can be broken down into a number of components. Those collections go to dedicated reserves. And then I made reference to the work of Jason's department around staging of development. That helps inform where the funding gets prioritized to.
So in the booming areas like Ancaster and Pembroke and Stony Creek and Waterdown, we're collecting a lot of DCs, but we're not getting the benefit of them.
Correct.
And that is not fair. It's not fair. See, if we can't get them from there, my area rating doesn't really cover getting roads and that, because I don't get any. But I don't get the DCs neither. I don't know what chance the suburbs have of developing the infrastructure that they need, and the parks and everything else that they need because of their growth. Thank you.
Okay, no more speakers. Will be Councillor Farr, you want to move it be received?
Just quickly, a second time, please.
No.
You really know how to chair this particular issue, I might add. You are very good at guiding the conversation and the ultimate agenda, but that's fine. Again, I've always appreciated having these discussions over many years. It's good to see the incentives that councils of this term and past terms have provided for development, have worked. And when I hear that we are not benefiting from this, I think that it at least deserves Judy or Hazel's comment on indeed whether or not that is true. And in fact, I would assume, having worked quite closely, obviously, with urban renewal over my tenure, this and last term as councillor, that's just not the case. So through you, Chair, to Hazel, in a nutshell, and not just specific to development charges and the reduction of what was 100%, now 75, next year 70, based on a council resolution to keep going down 5% a year, that will be reviewed in 2019, that will see a separate committee report on DCs in the second quarter of this, or the fourth quarter of this year. How are we benefiting Hazel or Judy or both from the programs that you have eloquently and succinctly outlined in today's report?
Well, through the chair, I'll start, then Judy can can also provide a comment. We always say our investments are, or should I say our financial incentives are not a gift, they're an investment. And when you look at two of our programs, which is the multi-residential and the tax increment grant program, the projects that have been approved have increased annually the municipal portion of the taxes by $5.7 million. So that's how collectively and on a broader basis we've increased the assessment and taxes.
That is annually. That is forevermore. Where these vacant lots are being built up, where these vacant buildings are finally being rejuvenated, and you see it all over the place. And a lot of them, if not all of them to date, that have talked to me are saying they're redeveloping these areas, brownfields and otherwise, because of the good incentive programs that councils of today and past days have brought forward. We're getting $5.7 million annually forevermore and climbing in areas where we're pretty much getting nothing. And that was the whole point of getting involved with what the province allows us to do in creating these SEPAs and these exemptions and all of those things. And I'm glad it's been referenced a few times. One more quick question, Mr. Chair. I do want to move on as well. And I really do understand and appreciate the arguments from other councillors, yourself, over the years and today. I do see, I am not blind to the fact, great things are happening. And I give a lot of credit to resolutions of the past and today that maintains these incentives. But we did have a great planning conversation on this, and you would have enjoyed this, Councillor or Deputy Mayor, where we're at, I think it's 185 jobs and people per hectare through the downtown. Through you to Jason, is that right? Or is it 165 jobs and persons per hectare?
Jason?
Through the chair, I'm going from memory of yesterday's conversation, but we're actually up over 200. We're not at the 250 target, which is the official plan policy target for the downtown. I believe as of our update to the end of 2016, we're around 220, I think, is our density in the downtown right now.
Okay, and 250 jobs per hectare has been our long time target through you, Chair.
Through the chair, that's correct. There's two key targets. One is that one. The other one that we work towards is that we've targeted the downtown to capture 20% of our intensification. And over the first 10 years of having that policy, we're in the neighborhood of 13%.
Okay. So because staff, and not myself and others through their questions, have correlated incentives to intensification targets, and because we are here in the core below our targets and have been for some time, but we're heading in the right direction, do we correlate going future with our debates and our reports on incentives, greater densities in the areas that don't have targets like 250 jobs and people per hectare? Do we debate, do we make part of the debate and part of the reports greater densities in those areas that don't have these kinds of projections? Is it correlated for future? Through you.
Through the chair, if I understand the question correctly, yes, I think the incentive program was certainly correlated to the official plan program of where that growth, where council wants to direct that growth. And as part of the grids process, we'll be reviewing those targets. My expectation is that in the downtown, it's only going to go in one direction, and that's up in terms of what the targets are. We've got about another 25,000 units of intensification to accommodate in the city over the next 25 years. And my sense is the recommendation I get from staff is to continue to try to focus as much of that as we can into the downtown.
Okay. Thanks. I'm good, and I will receive. And
move to receive, seconded by Councillor Collins. All in favor? Carried. Let's move on now to 8.4. Any questions on that? I need a motion to approve. Moved by Councillor Partridge, seconded by Councillor Scully. All in favor? That's carried. Let's move on to 9.1. Councillor Conley, this is your motion.
Thank you. It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Brenda Johnson. I'm just going to read the resolution, if that's okay. That staff of the real estate section of the Planning and Economic Development Department be authorized and directed to negotiate and enter into a 20-year nominal value $2 per year lease agreement for the lands identified in Appendix B, which is Falkers Falls Park, with the Hamilton Conservation Authority for the purpose of constructing, operating, and maintaining a neighborhood park and the amenities on the subject lands of the Hamilton Conservation Authority at Falkers Falls, on such other terms and conditions deemed appropriate to the General Manager of the Planning Economic Development Department and informed satisfaction to the city solicitor. And if I may, this is a park that was, it's seconded by Councillor Johnson. If I may, it's a park that's in by Falkers Falls. Is about 4.5. What? What? Okay.
What just happened? I couldn't hear
I
you.
think Brenda's not in the room to second
Second,
it.
because Councillor Pearson was seconding it?
So, no.
Councillor Collins, okay.
Chad Collins.
Okay, so anything else?
Well, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's land that wasn't taken care of, and now it's going to be taken care of as a park. We're going to put some swings in there that are for the kids that have already been ordered, I think. Okay. And I just hope that this goes through and that we can get started on it.
Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? It carries. Congratulations. Item 9.2, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. An administrative matter here before you, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Farr, that my opposition to port fuels be lifted from the table.
Carried. All in favor? Carried.
Well, Councillor Skeller just delivered me a coffee. I had to get myself organized. But just discussion on the motion, moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Farr. All in favor? Carried.
Second one.
So 9.2B, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. It's before you, and I won't get into any theatrics. I will say that this is the opposition to port fuels. It's since been squashed down at the Port Authority, so it's redundant. We just want to take it off the OBL.
Carried.
Just a quick comment on that, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Sure.
I just want to thank most members of this council who supported my opposition, not all, my memory's long, who supported my opposition to this project for all the reasons now the Ministry of Environment had identified. This company never had the stats and facts to substantiate the claims that they had. And I just want to say that in a very real way, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we do still have an outstanding crisis, or not crisis, but an outstanding obligation and responsibility to look at better waste management systems. My opposition to this company, and as passionate as it was because of who they were and what they said they were going to do without any type of verifiable evidence. It doesn't mean that I'm not open to, circular economies and different ways of dealing with trash. I was adamantly opposed to this company because they lied to us, I believe, every step along the way. But should there be, opportunities in the future for us to look at zero waste strategies or different technologies that might be better verified, have existing longitudinal scientific studies, I would look at it. So I'm not dogmatic on it, but this particular company was the wrong company, the wrong place, the wrong time. Thank you.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. Opposed? The motion carries. Is there any notices of motions? Seeing none, then, general information. Please have a motion to approve the amendments to the outstanding business list. Moved by Pearson, seconded by Conley. All in favor? Carried. May I now please have a motion to approve the August 14th closed session minutes as presented? Councillor Pearson, Councillor Conley, all in favor? Carried. May I please have a motion to move into closed session respecting items 12.2 and 12.3 pursuant to section 8.1, subsection C and E. I got a long ways to go here, guys. And F of the city's procedural bylaw 14-300 and section 239-2, subsection C, E, and F of the Ontario Municipal Act 2001, as amended as the subject matter pertains to opposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land for city purposes. Litigation or possible litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the city, and the receiving advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Could I now ask the public and any staff who are not required to be in closed session meeting, please exit the chambers, taking all of your personal belongings with you. Members of the public will be invited to return here to hear any further deliberations upon committee reconvening in open session, indicated by the removal of the frosting on the window and the elimination of the white noise. The committee will, in the event they are in closed session for more than 30 minutes, wait up to 5 minutes upon reconvening in open session before proceeding with the meeting to provide members of the public and media time to return to the meeting room. So a motion to go in camera with all those conditions. Moved by Scully, seconded by Farr. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.